challenges in accessing health care. Even when you have two parents in the best of circumstances, parenting is very hard. And so then you add all of these, and it's a lot. At Mountain Star, we serve over 300 children and their families annually across Central Oregon. We meet families where they are with the belief that everyone is doing the best they can with what they know and have. A belief gradually frees us from judgment and allows us to see ways that we can partner with vulnerable children and families in our lives. Strengthening families and keeping kids safe is the work that Mountain Star staff do every day. We know the impact of our work from the growth we see in our children and the changes we see in parents. Protecting children and giving them the best start possible is one of the most important things that we can do for our community. There are many partner organizations doing similar good work, like the Kids Center, CASA, Neighbor Impact, and Healthy Families of the High Desert. And there are amazing collaborations serving families at Bethlehem Inn and Saving Grace.
As community members, we all play an important role in keeping kids safe and increasing our community's resilience. A resilient community focuses on the root causes of trauma and creates systems and supports which allow for healing both now and into the future. This work is not new in Central Oregon. With leadership from United Way and Central Oregon Health Council, over 80 businesses and individuals committed to understanding the role they played in increasing our community's resilience and to working together to break down barriers that directly impact vulnerable individuals, children, and families. It can be as simple as knowing your neighbors and offering support when they are struggling. Learning about supporting and implementing policies that break down barriers on the community-wide level is the next action step to reducing stress on vulnerable families.
So with that, we invite to you, our commissioners, and the greater community all together to find a place where we can help to build resilience and break down barriers that keep families living on the margins of our community. Those families that are struggling to raise their children in a safe and nurturing environment. And we ask you to please join us. Thank you again for your continuing recognition of this important work in our county. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I just was wondering, you gave us numbers from 21. Can you compare them with 19?
With 2019, I believe in 2019 we were at about 745.
Confirmed victims for Central Oregon?
Confirmed victims for Central Oregon. And then in 2020, of course, with the pandemic and just kind of the reduction of people interacting with children, we had only 400.
I know, it went way down because of the lack of internet action.
Exactly.
So it actually was more than in 19, and then it went down. I wrote 725 for confirmed victims in 21.
Yeah, we went down a few.
20.
Confirmed victims from, no, we went down about 20
right.
confirmed cases from 2019 to 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, at least we didn't go up.
Yeah.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can do.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw, do you remember your numbers from 2019 versus 2021?
I mean, I think we all know that child abuse is vastly underreported, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some of these numbers are, these confirmed numbers are accurate, but it's not the reality really of what's going on out there.
Mm-hmm.
Our numbers have definitely dipped. We're back up this year, just
mm-hmm.
seeing more, and with our partners being staffed up as well, we're receiving more referrals.
Yeah. And I think the concerning theme that we're seeing is that families became really isolated during the pandemic, and we're still working to overcome that isolation. Families are really struggling on the margins, and if they don't know what resources to reach out to, resources that are going to come in and help them and partner with them in a non-judgmental way, they're not going to reach out because there's a lot of fear that if something's going wrong in their lives, anyone that they ask for help is going to try to take their children away.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear to
mm-hmm.
take the children away.
Yeah.
I know, that's what I was thinking when you said call this national number, and I thought, oh my gosh, but I bet they're scared because they don't want to lose their kids.
Yeah, and there is, I don't want to say it's flexibility. Of course, if there is a need and DHS verifies that need, that children are unsafe in their environment, they are going to remove children from that environment. But that is definitely a last resort.
Yeah, it's not what
There's
they
a lot
want
of
to
other
do.
steps that happen before that, such as connecting a family with young children to Mountain Star, referring to early childhood special education or early intervention services, connecting with a caring preschool. There's just a lot of different supports that can come along before a child is removed from the home.
Yeah.
Well, on a happier note, yesterday I was at a meeting talking about the Ben Children's Museum that they're putting together. So, to have something that we don't have in Deschutes, in Central Oregon, and, something really focused on children.
Yeah.
So I definitely it's on the happier side, and I think most people sitting around that table seemed like 3 children was the magic number. So, we'll really like to see that happen. So it sounds like it's closer, and they say their children keep asking them, is the museum ready yet, Mom? So anyway, that was a happier moment.
Let's help remind people that support and resources are out there
Yeah,
with this proclamation.
Commissioner Chang, do you want to start and read the first 5?
Sure. A
Paragraphs?
proclamation declaring April 2023 to be Child Abuse Prevention Month. Whereas there were over 4,800 reports of child abuse and neglect in Central Oregon last year. And whereas we all have a responsibility as individuals, neighbors, community members, and citizens of Central Oregon to help create healthy, safe, nurturing experiences for children. And whereas safe and healthy childhoods help produce confident and successful adults. And whereas child abuse and neglect often occur when people find themselves in stressful situations without community resources and don't know how to cope. And whereas the majority of child abuse and neglect cases stem from situations and conditions that are preventable with the support of an engaged community.
Whereas child abuse and neglect can be reduced by making sure that families have the support and access to services they need to raise their children in a healthy environment, and whereas child abuse and neglect not only directly harm children, but the trauma can also increase the likelihood of criminal behavior, substance abuse, health problems such as heart disease and obesity, and poor academic outcomes. And whereas effective prevention programs succeed because of the partnerships among agencies, schools, faith communities, philanthropic and civic organizations, law enforcement agencies, and the business community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim April 2023 to be Child Abuse Prevention Month in Deschutes County, and we urge all citizens to work together to make sure every family has the support they need and deserve to raise their children in a healthy environment. Dated this 5th day of April 2023 by the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners. So, Commissioner Chang, would you like to make that motion?
I move adoption of this proclamation declaring April 2023 to be Child Abuse Prevention Month.
And I will second it. Any other discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So thank you so much for joining us. And, let's hope more good things happen. It looks like social media is really not a good spot for kids to be on. And, maybe we can, see the numbers continue to decrease, but at a greater volume next year. But we'll want to see you in April.
Yes.
And thank
That
you
positive
again.
report.
Very much.
Thank you again for the work that you do every day to take care of our vulnerable kids in our community.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And now we are looking for the fair housing people. Are there fair housing people in the room?
Tyler's here.
Tyler? Is this your baby? Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Would you like me to say a few words before the proclamation?
Could you introduce yourself, though, first?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tyler Neese. I'm the Government Affairs Director with the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. And first of all, just thank you for the opportunity to come say a few words and for recognizing Fair Housing Month through this proclamation. April is a significant month for fair housing. The Fair Housing Act was passed on April 11th, 1968, and this time of year, every year, fair housing advocates and realtors across the country celebrate this milestone. I think we certainly recognize, we've come a long way in terms of fair housing in this country, but there's also a lot of work left to do. Our members are actively, as part of their training and to become a realtor and then maintain, their licensure, they complete fair housing courses. We have a simulation that they complete called Fair Haven. It kind of walks them through various fair housing scenarios and different situations. It's all very important in terms of just understanding what the fair housing laws are and what what opportunities still exist. We believe that discrimination distorts the housing market and unfortunately closes the door to home ownership for far too many. And so as an organization, we're committed to fair housing. The Realtor motto is fair housing makes us stronger. And I think that this proclamation is really just a great reaffirmation of that from the county and really, I think, reaffirming your commitment to fair housing. So we appreciate that. We thank you for all the work that you do around fair housing. And happy to answer any questions that you have.
Tyler, thanks for kind of giving us at the very high level a sense of the work that's left to do. Could you comment specifically about challenges or issues or bottlenecks we have in the state of Oregon to meet the goals and intent of the Fair Housing Act? I mean, it's like, what is, at the state level or even, the community level, what does the work that's left to do look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, that's a great question, and I would say it's probably pretty layered, right? There's a lot of different challenges. Certainly, I think we've come again a very long way. I think that our organization and many others, work very hard to make sure that fair housing law is really understood by all parties. But I think it's really one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is just making sure that there adequate resources exist, that we have the tools, especially in this type of housing environment. I think that it continues to be challenging in terms of affordability, but also accessibility. And so I think the more tools, the more funding that we have, the more partnerships and opportunities that we have available, I think will really be critical in ensuring, especially that underserved populations and those that may have been, historically marginalized or have not had access to, one thing, for instance, is just kind of, financial literacy or access to, credit and things of that nature. And so I think there's a lot of catching up there to do nationally. Really, that's certainly not an Oregon problem, but I think that again we've come a long way and will continue to work to make sure that all have adequate access and fair access to housing.
Got it. So I mean, you had shared a little bit of kind of the training and information that's available to realtors, but then now you just talked about kind of the homeowner end of the home buyer end of the equation and access to credit and financial literacy, and that's helpful to understand as well. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, are there ever fair housing cases filed in Deschutes County? Have you seen any? I mean, I'm just wondering. This has been here for so long.
It's a great question. I have not seen any. I mean, what I think what we come across and what we experience more often is a lot of questions around fair housing. What the rules are and kind of what language is appropriate in a listing and things like that. And so, our organization, we have staff that really works to make sure that we're educating both consumers and members on, what, and I think that it's, what we see more often is not blatant issues related to fair housing, but more just kind of, is the language that's included in, in listing or communicating with members, is that current based on fair housing law? So it's not, I think often those type of instances are not intentional by any means. It's just making sure that we're updating kind of the way that we approach the market. So yeah, no, I think that both consumers and all of those dealing in real estate within our county do a really great job and try to stay abreast of what the laws are and fairly represent their clients.
So Tyler, what about this is off the subject, but it's really applicable to our community, because I just was talking to someone and their rent was going up, one bedroom, to $1,950 a month. And that seemed incredibly high for a one bedroom. And so I'm wondering if they've actually come up with a determination for the rent increase allowed through Salem, through legislation. Is that still in transition, according to what I've been hearing?
Yeah, that's a great question. That would be a separate proclamation, I guess, right?
Right. No, I know.
But no, it's and I know that. So actually, just yesterday was the deadline for kind of legislative committees. So I know there's a lot of bills that died, and that determination was kind of made yesterday. I don't know the latest on that particular policy, but I know that it's something that's been discussed quite a bit. I actually have some. I'd be happy to share with you all if you're interested. I have some great data around kind of rental policy at the state level. There's a good website that we have that kind of pulls together different information on the impact of what rent control measures and things like that has been, and whether it's been positive for tenants and for landlords throughout the state. So I'd be happy to share that if you'd like a little more data.
That would be great if you
Yeah.
could share that with us.
Sure.
No, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Circling back to that, to access to credit and financial literacy for our potential home buyers, are other states doing a better job than we are in Oregon?
Boy, that's a great question. I don't know that it's, I think it really varies. I think different states have different challenges, I think, in regards to fair housing and different fair housing rules. I think that Oregon has been, very progressive in terms of a lot of the fair housing work that has been done. And I think that's, a large credit to Oregon realtors at the state level in Salem. I think have, whether it's things like love letters or different policies throughout the last couple of years, they've really tried to be intentional about looking at, what are some practices that may not be in keeping with fair housing law, and have really tried to work with the legislature to advance that type of policy. And so I would say that I think we're actually, one of probably the more progressive states when it comes to fair housing law. But I think there's, I'm a firm believer in that we can always learn from others, and I think there's good models, and I think others are learning from us as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to start by reading the first
Sure.
4
Yes.
paragraphs, please?
Yeah, a proclamation declaring April 2023 as Fair Housing Month. Whereas the Fair Housing Act, enacted on April 11th, 1968, enshrined into federal law the goal of eliminating racial segregation and ending housing discrimination in the United States. And whereas the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, and disability, and commits recipients of federal funding to affirmatively further fair housing in their communities. And whereas Deschutes County is committed to the mission and intent of Congress to provide fair and equal housing opportunities for all. And whereas our social fabric, the economy, health, and environment are strengthened in diverse, inclusive communities.
And whereas, more than 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, discrimination persists and many communities remain segregated. And whereas acts of housing discrimination and barriers to equal housing opportunity are repugnant to a common sense of dignity and fairness. And whereas Deschutes County is an inclusive community committed to fair housing and to promoting appropriate activities by private and public entities to provide an advocate for equal housing opportunities for all residents and prospective residents of Deschutes County. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners does hereby declare the month of April 2023 as Fair Housing Month, and we will date it today, April 5th. When we have the motion.
I move adoption of this proclamation declaring April 2023 as Fair Housing Month in Deschutes County.
And I'll second it. Any further discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's one thing I wanted to mention, the safe parking program in Redmond. they're working with people. Some of the people that they help actually need like a first and last month help, and then they can get them back into an apartment, some type of housing. So I just think that is wonderful to know that we have people in our community, and just, thanking Rick Russell and his team for all the hard work that they do. But really, people need their housing. So
Absolutely.
thank you for bringing
A lot of
this.
great organizations that are.
Yeah, that are really working hard.
And thank you for keeping Fair Housing Month on our radar every year.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, commissioners. Appreciate it.
Okay. Nathaniel Miller, we have a public hearing on a plan amendment and zone change to approximately 93 acres located east of Bend between Neff and Highway 20. Now, I did this thing. Is that what this is? Oh, no, this is something else. Oh, sure. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay. It looks like I can speak first. This is the time and place set for a hearing regarding file number 247-22-000313-ZC and 247-22-000314-PA, a request for a comprehensive plan amendment to change the designation for the subject properties from agricultural to rural residential exception area, and a corresponding zone change to rezone the subject properties from exclusive farm use to multiple use agriculture. Staff will outline the hearing procedures that will be followed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dare. For the record, Nathaniel Miller, Associate Planner with the Planning Division. Today, the Board of County Commissioners will take testimony and receive written evidence concerning a quasi-judicial application requesting approval of a plan amendment and zone change for a property comprising approximately 93 acres. Today's hearing will proceed as follows. First, staff will explain the hearing format and how to testify at today's hearing, followed by a brief presentation on the application. Then, the testimony portion of the hearing will begin. The applicant will present first, then government agencies. Next, persons in support will testify, and those in opposition will testify last. Afterwards, the applicant will then be afforded an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. And finally, staff will make closing comments. This is a hybrid public hearing with both in-person and remote participation. Before starting your testimony, please provide your first and last name as well as your mailing address. I will note that the board has established time limits for testimony. The applicant will have 30 minutes. Agencies will have 10 minutes. Members of the public will have 3 minutes. And the applicant will have 10 minutes for rebuttal. For our in-person participants wishing to testify, please fill out a blue sign-up sheet and submit it to the board secretary, Brenda, to the left of the dais. Vice Chair Dare will call up in-person participants for their testimony. After your name is called, please come up to one of the tables at the front of the room before beginning your testimony. For our remote participants, if you want to testify, you must be logged into Zoom or have called in using the Zoom dial-in option. When Vice Chair Adair asks if anyone would like to testify, you will need to use the raised hand feature to notify the board. To do this, you need to press the raised hand button on your computer or smart device. If you called in, dial *9. In addition to oral testimony, if anyone has written testimony to submit, please hand it to me. If you are in person, please submit your written testimony to me after your testimony. If you are participating remotely, you can submit your written testimony via email to me at nathaniel.miller@deschutes.org. The Vice Chair and staff are responsible for conducting an orderly hearing. Any testimony or behavior which is inappropriate will be addressed and may result in that member of the public being removed from the hearing. At this time, I'm going to ask if there are any objections to the format of the hearing. If yes, please raise your hand if you are in person, or use the raise hand function if you are attending remotely.
Do we see anything, Stephanie? Okay, and I see no raised hands in the room,
Okay.
except for the gentleman putting his coat on. So, thank you.
Seeing none, staff will continue. Vice Chair Dare, I will now turn the script and note that the commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, prior hearing observations, biases, or conflicts of interest.
Does any commissioner have anything to disclose? And if so, please state the nature of same and whether you can proceed.
I have nothing to disclose and can proceed.
And I have nothing to disclose at this time, and I believe I can proceed. Does any party wish to challenge any commissioner, member of the hearing body, based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? I see no raised hand. Are there any raised hands online, Stephanie? As no challenges are presented prior to opening the hearing, does anyone have any procedural objections to the public hearing? Are there any? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, the hearing is now open. Staff will proceed with a brief staff report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dare. The subject property is comprised of tax lots 1200 and 1201 and is approximately 93 acres in size. The property is east of the city of Bend, west of Hamby Road, and stretches between Neff Road to the north and Highway 20 to the south. The property and other properties to the east are within the exclusive farm use zone. Properties to the north and southeast are within the multiple use agricultural zone. The urban area reserve zone abuts the property to the west. Staff notes that the City of Bend's urban growth boundary abuts the property to the northwest and is also directly south of tax lot 1201. As noted earlier, the applicant requests approval of a comprehensive plan amendment to change the designation of the property from agricultural to rural residential exception area. The applicant also requests approval of a corresponding zone change to rezone the properties from exclusive farm use to multiple use agricultural. No Goal 3 exception is proposed. The applicant has provided evidence in the record that the property does not contain predominantly farmable soils and is incorrectly designated as agricultural land. In addition to the burden of proof, the applicant has submitted a soil study from Red Hill Soils and a traffic study by Transite Consulting LLC in support of the proposal. The Deschutes County Hearings Officer held a public hearing on November 15th, 2022. No members of the public testified in opposition to or in support of the applications during the hearing. The applicant's legal representation provided testimony during the hearing. On December 15th of 2022, the hearings officer issued a recommendation of approval for the proposed plan amendment and zone change. Up until the public hearing, staff received 2 comments to the record in opposition to the proposal. One letter of opposition expressed concerns with increased residential density in the area. The other comment questioned the proposal's ability to meet the relevant criteria. Staff also received 1 comment of support. Staff notes that a number of nearby residents did inquire about the proposal after receiving notice. Staff responded to a number of questions regarding the nature and scope of the proposal. After these initial contacts, no further comments for the record were received by these individuals. Staff notes that after the notice was mailed for this hearing, 2 comments of opposition were received. These comments were uploaded to the record. And I do want to note that I did receive 2 comments this morning from the Bayards, and I did print those out and give those to the commissioners prior to the hearing, and those are those 2 comments that we received. I do want to note also, too, that the staff report is printed out and is at the side of the room there if anybody would like to look at the staff report. And with that, this concludes the summary of the proposal. Staff is available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
I believe that all my questions have been answered by the staff report.
Okay. And yes, we did receive that 1 letter on Monday from Toby. But thank you for that copy today to get it in the report. So let us, can then we take testimony from our applicant? Yes.
If I could just add something to the record before we get started and open up the public hearing, is I wanted to make note that Chair DeBonne is planning to review the video from this public hearing, and he intends to participate in the deliberations once that comes back to the board at that time.
That's what I was assuming we would be doing. Okay,
just
thank you
wanted
for
to make sure it was clear.
Yeah, clarifying it, yes. And so you did hear that you have 30 minutes for your presentation at this time.
Yeah,
And-
it's a very big file.
Yes, and we do have a timer, do we not, Brenda?
This is a small fraction of the file. I'd need a wagon to bring it all. Don't start timing me yet, okay?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm waiting, I'm like looking for the timer. You've got it, okay. Stephanie will let you know if you're getting close to 30.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Tia Lewis. I'm an attorney for the applicant, and I have with me Matt Wellner. He is a representative for the applicant. So I do have a PowerPoint. I think it's up there, and briefly, I'm going to go over that PowerPoint. Some of it will be a little bit duplicative of staff, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But primarily, what the PowerPoint is designed to do is to point you, one, to where the evidence is in the record to demonstrate compliance with the applicable approval criteria, and two, to point you to the findings in the record of both staff and the hearings officer, which explain the facts, the evidence, and how those facts and evidence demonstrate compliance with the applicable approval criteria. Then I want to talk to you after the PowerPoint about urbanization and how failing to rezone unproductive agricultural lands on our urban fringe contributes to both our housing shortage and drives up the cost of housing. Then Matt will briefly testify, and we do want to reserve some opportunity for rebuttal, which I saw that in the procedural comments. So let's start with the PowerPoint. Let's see if I can make sure I can actually operate it. Is it is it the up arrow? To advance the side? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so staff went over the subject property facts of 94 acres. We rounded up, they rounded down, so it was 93 and a couple. And it is adjacent to the urban reserve. It is across Highway 20 from the affordable housing project that is currently under construction under House Bill 4079, and it's sandwiched between the urban area and the MUA 10. There are no water rights on the subject property, and it has no history of farm use. This information can be found in the applicant's burden of proof on page 1, and it's discussed extensively in the soil study, which is Exhibit 5 to the application materials. It's also found on page 2 of the staff report, and in fact, staff confirmed with aerial imagery that the vegetation on the subject property has remained in its current state since at least 1994. So the existing land use pattern for the area, this subject property is surrounded on 3.5 sides by either urban or non-resource land. The only adjacent EFU land is heavily parcelized, with the largest being 28 acres. Up to the north is the Quail Ridge subdivision, and to the northeast is also the Big Sky recreation complex with which we are all familiar. The only EFU lands there's to the east of the subject property is a block of EFU lands, all of which are parcelized and developed with non-farm dwellings. There is some, looks like some hobby farming activity going on the 28-acre piece. It is in farm tax deferral, but again, has a non-farm dwelling on it. So this subject property is adjacent to the east of the recent Highway 20 roundabout. You guys have seen the size of that roundabout, and that roundabout is located on one of the parcels that was the subject of a non-resource designation in 2019. and it is currently zoned MUA 10. That roundabout increases access through this transit corridor, and with Ward Hamby now being used as the route to get around the city and avoid the north interchange, as that area will be heavily under construction when ODOT starts the roundabouts up there. So just to the south of the subject property is the House Bill 4079 parcel that was annexed and brought inside the UGB. This also was a piece of property that was the subject of a non-resource zone change. This was known as the Porter Kelly Burns application, and it enabled the House bill to go forward to bring that property to get annexed inside the city, and they are currently platting phase 1 of that project. So this slide represents the non-resource agricultural zone changes that have been done along the eastern boundary of the city of Bend. The subject property is highlighted in black, and the other non-resource designations are shown in red. There is the East Side Bend application that was approved in 2019, where that Highway 20 roundabout is currently located. There's the Porter Kelly Burns application that was approved in 2017 that I just showed you, where the at least a portion of the House Bill 4079 development is going forward. There's the COID property that was approved in 2022. There is that large block of land is the state, was formerly the Division of State Lands property. It was approved for an MUA 10 zoning in 2 separate decisions, one in 2013 and one in 2018. And as most of you know, the western half of that property is 375 acres. It's known as the Stevens Ranch development. It's currently has been annexed to the city of Bend and master planned with 237 residential acres, 46 commercial acres, and 93 industrial acres, all of which includes parks, open space, and an elementary school site. The eastern half of that property is the subject of House Bill 3318, 261 acres, which is being developed with affordable and workforce housing project and master planned by the city of Bend as a complete community. All of the file numbers and the dates for these particular zone changes can be found in section 5.12 of the legislative history of the comprehensive plan. And as far as I know, not one of those properties has been divided into 10-acre parcels, despite the MUA 10 zoning. So here are the rezoning criteria for the subject application as found in the Deschutes County Code. These are briefed extensively in our application materials and in the staff report, and then again in the hearings officer's decision. So I'm not going to go over these in great detail, but I do want to point you to the areas of the record where they are discussed. The evidence in support of the compliance with these criteria is found on pages 11 through 17 of the application materials, pages 11 through 13 of the staff report, and pages 4 through 12 of the hearings officer's decision. Specifically, those materials address the comprehensive plan policies in section 2.2 regarding agricultural lands, the water resources policies in section 2.5, and the rural growth policies in chapter 3. For criteria B, that the change in the classification is consistent with the purpose and intent of the proposed zone, which is the MUA 10 zone. The materials in support of these in support of compliance with this criteria, is found at pages 17 through 18 of the burden of proof, 13 through 14 of the staff report, and page 5 of the hearings officer's decision. Under C1, the availability and efficiency of providing necessary public services, the evidence is found on page 18 of the burden of proof, pages 14 through 15 of the staff report, and pages 5 through 6 and pages 17 of the hearings officer's decision. For C2, the impacts on surrounding land use will be consistent with the specific goals and policies contained within the comprehensive plan. The evidence is on page 19 of the burden of proof, pages 15 through 16 of the staff report, and page 6 of the hearings officer's decision. Again, for D, the change in circumstances, that is found in pages 19 through 20 of the burden of proof, 16 through 17 of the staff report, and 6 through 7 of the hearings officer's decision. Unless there are questions, I'm going to keep going about those particular criteria, and I will be happy to address any questions at the end. So this particular slide is designed to discuss, or to remind me to discuss, the state law regarding this application, because in addition to the Deschutes County Comprehensive Plan and the code, there are state laws which regulate the rezone of agricultural land. As used in...
A question, Tia. On this
You-
slide, you say 73% class
Absolutely.
1 or 2, and on our memo, it said 71%.
Oh.
So maybe we can get that clarified at one point in time.
I will look back in our application materials and at the end and come
Okay.
back at rebuttal and give you.
Yeah, I just saw that number and I thought, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for that if that.
Well, I don't know where they are.
Could be a typo in my materials or in the other materials, but I will definitely verify the.
Okay.
In any event, it's well over 50%. But yeah, so with regard to the state laws, there are the Oregon state statutes, the Oregon administrative rules, and the statewide planning goals, all of which regulate agricultural land. As used in Goal 3, agricultural land is defined as lands classified predominantly as Class 1 through 6 soils in Central Oregon. So this subject property is absolutely not predominantly Class 1 through 6 soils. It is predominantly Class 7 through 8 soils, whether it's 71 or 73%. There clearly is no forest land associated with this particular piece of property. And in addition to the definitional route, the administrative rules also address other suitability factors: soil fertility, suitability for grazing, availability of water, and climatic conditions. All of those are discussed extensively in Exhibit 5 of the application materials, and again in the hearings officer and staff report. That is the only evidence in the record demonstrating the agricultural viability of this particular property, and the NCRS data is very vague. The subject property was the subject of an Order 1 soil study and that's Exhibit 5, which has been certified by DLCD. So that is the end of the PowerPoint, but I do have a couple of handouts that I want to give you because I want to talk to you about urbanization. Central Oregon Land Watch filed a comment in the subject application questioning whether or not we would meet the applicable approval criteria, but did not identify any approval criteria that they argue we fail to meet. And so I contacted Central Oregon Land Watch when they filed that letter and asked them what criteria they believe that we didn't meet, and I reminded them of the location of this property and the lack of water rights and the lack of agricultural activity, and suggested to them that this was exactly the kind of property that Central Oregon Land Watch should support for the zone change so that it could be urbanized. Now, that's the last communication we've had from them. So my assumption was that they agreed with me because they aren't here, they haven't submitted any further comments, and that was the comment that they did submit, was we question whether they meet the criteria. That was it. So I have a couple of handouts that I want to give you, and I have, Nathan, the copy for you for the file. Is it okay to
Yes,
approach?
of course.
It's 2 pages each.
Do you want to lay some for Commissioner DeBonne?
2 for Tony as well, yes.
Please, thanks.
So what you have there are the Bend UGB maps, the one from 2010 and the one from 2016. So I'm going to try to briefly talk you through what happened here. So the last time Bend expanded its UGB, the process took 9 years. It started in 2007, and resulted in the map that you see in front of you that's marked the 2010 map. That blue dashed line is the expansion area. It was 8,500 acres. And when Bend submitted that UGB map to the state, they based that map on, I think, 3 years of planning. They hired consultants, experts in their field. They developed a housing needs analysis. They developed an employment needs analysis, and they used employment projections to develop this map. They took it through the public planning process, numerous hearings, numerous public meetings, and submitted this map to the state in 2010 based on all of the expert reports that they had determining that the city of Bend needed 8,500 acres to meet its land need during the planning period, which was 20 years at that time until 2027. Well, we all know what happened with that UGB. It was heavily contested. It got appealed. It went to the state, and it took the state 3 years to remand it back to the city of Bend. By this time, the city of Bend had spent $4 million to get that UGB in front of the state and argue the appeal and get the remand back. The remand told the city of Bend that they needed to reduce the size of the expansion area and that they should only bring in, and this is consistent with the state rules, resource lands, meaning EFU or forest lands, if they could demonstrate that there were no other lands that were zoned non-resource or exception areas that could meet this 8,500 acre need. So from 2014 to 2016, Bend worked on creating a consensus and came forward with a much smaller expansion area. That's the second map you have in front of you, marked 2016. And the yellow highlighted areas are the only areas that were brought inside the UGB in that 2016 expansion. It represents 2,380 acres. If you look at these maps, those yellow areas that were brought inside the UGB in 2016, there's only 2 of those that have vertical development right now, 7 years later. So we wonder why we have a housing shortage and an affordability problem. If you look at that first map with the blue dashed lines, all of that land on the east side of Bend was designated to come in. But the dark green colors represent resource zoned land. So when the state sent this map back to the city, they said, you can only bring this resource zoned land in if you can demonstrate that none of the other land that's not zoned resource can meet your needs. And so if you look at the next map, you saw what the city did. They took all of the resource zoned lands out of the expansion. All of those resource zoned lands were the lands that were efficiently and economically served with public services in our city. The lands they brought in, the reason they're not developed now is because it's taken this long to get sewer to them, to get services to them, to provide transportation infrastructure to serve them. So when we keep this agricultural zoning on properties that aren't agricultural, we make it harder for the city of Bend to expand its UGB. We make it cost more, and that drives up the cost of housing in our community, both from an affordability standpoint and a supply chain standpoint. So 7 years later, we have very little development on that $4+ million effort that it took for the city of Bend to expand its UGB.
Ms. Lewis, what was the exact number you said then? How much development is on that additional? Was it two developments? You were
Yeah. So in area number 10, that's the Easton subdivision that Polish is developing right now. And in area 16 on the west side, that's the stuff that was adjacent to Northwest Crossing and that Brooks and those guys there was already significant infrastructure over there to serve. So some of those lots in 16 are getting developed, and some of the property in 10 is getting developed. Now, 12 is underway. That's Stevens Ranch. but it won't have vertical development on it for another year because the sewer infrastructure. To develop 12, the off-site infrastructure costs were in excess of $25 million. All of the infrastructure to serve it has to go right by the property we're talking about. So that's what happens when we leave this agricultural zoning on these properties that aren't agricultural. It's a huge cost to our community. And what's happening right now, you saw those, I showed you all of those non-resource zone changes. The private property owners are paying. We submitted this application in April of last year. We're just now in front of you, and tens of thousands of dollars. So who benefits from this rezone? The community. The private property owners are paying for this process so that this property can be urbanized in accordance with the state laws when the City of Bend expands its UGB. And the City of Bend, for better or worse, has decided not to do urban reserve planning, so the MUA 10 zone is de facto the reserve zone. Now, you can't really blame their reasoning for that, is because the urban reserve planning takes just as long, it's equally as hotly contested as a UGB, and then once you get the urban reserve, then you got to go back and do a UGB. So this is the process that is going to enable the city to expand its UGB when they undertake that effort the next planning period. So I do want to reserve a few months for rebuttal, but I want to let Matt testify for a moment. I'm not sure where our time is.
Okay.
If we could
9 minutes.
pause,
Perfect.
if
We
we could
ask-
pause the
I ask
clock so I
question.
could ask a question. I mean, I don't want to cut into, I want you to have your 9.5 minutes that are left. But Tia, thank you so much for pulling this discussion out to the 90,000-foot level.
Yeah.
This is something that I am regularly reminded by staff and legal counsel that I'm not supposed to do. I'm supposed to focus on the application at hand, the criteria at hand, and basically what we're looking at is an application to rezone land from EFU to MUA, or in other cases rural residential 10. But these are the questions that these are the struggles that I have with these rezones on the immediately on the east side of the city of Bend, because they do seem to me to be the most appropriate places for future urban growth boundary expansion and urbanization. My concern is that we don't know, we don't have certainty that the urban growth boundary is going to expand in any reasonable amount of time. It's very unclear what the city is kind of what their intentions are along those lines. And I know that they're being asked by the state to infill more and use up what they've already absorbed into the urban growth boundary, which you just very articulately explained why it's difficult to use that land. But where it puts us is that you can view this as a two-step process. You rezone from EFU, then it's not resource land, and it's much easier to bring into an urban growth boundary expansion. But then that urban growth boundary expansion has to happen, and if we don't know when it's going to happen, then my concern is, do the owners of these lands get impatient, waiting for an urban growth boundary expansion to occur, and then develop at rural residential densities, which would make these properties super difficult to urbanize later on. So I was holding, I was going to hold until the end of the hearing to raise with our community development staff again, kind of my questions about, how do we get the urban area reserve establishment or the UGB expansion? Or we've had some discussions recently about a unique kind of county overlay. Essentially, the question is, how do we, if we're only doing one step of the two-step process of urbanizing these lands with the land use decision before us, how do we ensure that those lands will be available for urbanization? So since you get it, and thank you again for pulling us up to the 90,000-foot level. I hope after this hearing is over, we can have some discussions about how we get the coordination between the city and the county that we need to have to ensure that these lands that I believe that all these property owners, they would much prefer to have their lands incorporated into the UGB, developed at urban densities. It would be, I believe, a lot more profitable for them. How do we ensure that that's going to happen?
And I'm not positive there was a question in there, but I do want to just give you at least a comment related to what you said. I recognize that the difference between a quasi-judicial application that we have in front of us and what you're talking about, which is a legislative effort to try to address these issues countywide, that's where people scold you sometimes, is to say, you got to look at the quasi, and that is what we have, yeah. But there's always, it's all about how our land gets used and how our community efficiently and economically grows and also protects the resources, which are the reason we all came here. So regardless of whether we're talking about a quasi-judicial or a legislative matter, we all kind of have the same issues. One of the ways, though, that the county zoning, particularly the MUA 10 zoning, allows for eventual urbanization is through the cluster subdivision rules. And specifically, the county's rules require a 65% preservation of open space and authorize the urbanization of that open space upon UGB inclusion. And so in the event property owners were to get impatient, as you say, and again, I pointed you to at least 7 decisions that have been in place since 2013, and not one of them have been divided into 10-acre pieces, to my knowledge. But the cluster subdivision rules specifically do provide for eventual urbanization, and it wouldn't be difficult to urbanize properties when they have a 65% of it preserved as open space. Even if the remaining property is 2.5 acres, those can often be urbanized as well, depending on where the dwellings are placed. An example of this phenomenon, so to speak, is the tree line subdivision on the west side of Bend. It was rezoned to a non-resource zoning in 2010 and developed as a cluster subdivision, and the remaining open space has since been annexed inside the city of Bend and is currently developed at urban levels. So there is some protection.
And is that a distinction between MUA 10 and RR 10? I mean, MUA 10, if you want to develop a large block of it, you have the option of doing a cluster, and RR10 you don't?
No, you have the option of doing a cluster in the RR10 as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very helpful.
I think when you start talking, it should go on, or am I wrong about it?
You should
Push? Maybe push?
It's on.
Is it on? Okay.
Probably.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Matt Weller. I am here representing the applicant and property owner. Not part of my testimony, but what I will say is when we purchased this property, it was with the intent and expectation that someday urbanization would head this direction. What we paid for the property wouldn't allow us to go do a 9-lot subdivision. Potentially, we could do a cluster and preserve a portion of the property for future urbanization later. But our intent and our hope is that between now and 15 years from now, the city grows this way, and we're in the path of that progress. So I did want to provide you with a little bit of clarity on what our plans are for the future of the property and what I know of the property. I see these map amendments as a very helpful tool to the city of Bend and their future growth management decisions. This one, in my eyes, would certainly give the city more flexibility in the future. It's in an area that makes a lot of sense for them. At some point in time, and again, I don't have any idea when that is, the city is going to need to grow outward. There are pressures to grow upward, but that can't solve all of the problem. It has to go both ways. All we are trying to do with this request is to be prepared for that conversation and to be part of that conversation. And as an EFU zone land, it's very difficult to be part of that conversation. When that direction is taken to expand, the city is going to look for places that make sense in locations that are easily served with good access, that are near employment, that are near shopping areas, that are near restaurants. And I believe that this site checks all of those boxes. It makes a lot of sense for the city to move eastward, and again, this will give them that option in the future. Our contiguous ownership is actually slightly more than the 93 acres that are addressed in this application. We own 3 of the UAR 10 parcels that are immediately west of this application. So we have about 120 contiguous acres that are connected to the urban growth boundary at a couple of different locations. Having spent a lot of time walking on the property, I can tell you that there are numerous rock outcrops. There is an irrigation canal that goes right through the middle of it. There are overhead power lines and low-value soils, and these are all significant impediments to agricultural activity being, to an agricultural use being present. The other major impediment is simply the proximity to the urban environment. The closer you get to the urban area, the closer you get to other subdivisions, the harder it gets to get agricultural equipment on and off the property and travel down the road. The more you have conflict with residents in adjacent neighboring backyards. Having investigated the property, I didn't find any evidence of historical agricultural activity, and nor did I find any evidence of water rights. We have public street stubs to our west. We have frontage on Hamby Road, frontage on Neff Road, and frontage on Highway 20. As Tia mentioned, we're immediately north of the HB 4079 project, Parkside Place, that's on the south side of Highway 20. And I personally believe that we are in the path of progress for the city of Bend, that this makes a lot of sense for their future, and that this will give them more options than they currently have. And I'm hopeful that you will support our request, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Matt, you mentioned the within the same ownership that some of these UAR 10s to the UAR 10 lands to the west are part of the same ownership. Can you tell us which ones of these?
That property?
The long skinny one.
Yeah, there's 2 long skinny ones that stack on top of each other.
Okay.
And so those 2 properties that are immediately adjacent, and then up on Neff Road, there is a square property that is just to the west of, you see this block, I'm sorry. Right
Yep.
here.
Those 2 little squares, or one of those 2
We have
little
one
squares?
of the 2, and we've been talking with the other property owner. And we've been talking with all the owners in this kind of Hamby, Neff Road block, and there's a lot of interest, and I haven't heard anybody with any real concerns about what our hope is for the future here.
So when you said you had, 120 acres?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, and so that long skinny strip was one of them, and then the other square above?
Correct. And those are both, they weren't part of this application because they're already UAR 10.
Right,
Okay,
right.
all right. I know, I was wondering, like, what's that strip?
Yeah.
That will definitely put your ownership right in the path of future urban growth.
Great.
That concludes the applicant's presentation.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
No, thank you. So let's see, do we have any agencies that are in the room that want to testify? Any government bodies? No? Are there any government bodies online, Stephanie? Okay.
And Nathaniel, the city of Bend did not weigh in any way on this application.
Commissioner Chang, I did send notice to the city of Bend, but we did not receive any comments.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Are there any persons in the room that are in support of this? We would like to recognize them at this time. I don't think do we have any blue sheets to fill out? Does anyone want to testify in support? Any raised hands, Stephanie? Okay. Any persons in opposition of this project, of the 93 acres? Or 94, if you're going to be... One online? Okay. Do you want to recognize them?
Hi, this is Doreen again.
Oh, Doreen, for the record, could you identify yourself and your address, please?
Doreen Tai, and I live at 62465 Powell Butte Highway, 97701.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to get all this in, but this is a large, intact, exclusive farm use tract. It's incredibly important we keep large EFU tracts like this intact for innumerable reasons, including protecting sustainability and wildlife. Most property owners outside of UGB did not intend to live next to development anytime soon. Until recently, most of us trusted Oregon's protective land use laws would be honored. I stand with Baird and Vera comments. I've no doubt development at this location is unjust to nearby property owners and sustainability goals. Development here facilitates and encourages an inappropriate urban sprawl, forcing utility, road, and resource extensions while increasing emissions, and could create an area similar to living in a UGB without any of the benefits. And I'm also going to attach later the other comments that I said earlier that are appropriate. We farm nearby, and I find statements about it being incorrectly zoned with EFU quite unbelievable. Based on viability of local hobby farms reference, there must be an independent review of soils claim. Without water rights, this further convolutes viability statements of value added by rezoning for subdivision. Yes, water is an undeniable local problem, and running resources further outside of UGB while excluding biodiversity further exacerbates water and resource strains. Might I also remind this hearing of how much hobby farms adds to our economy, viability, resiliency, and sustainability. According to legislature in 2015, ag contributed $5.7 billion to our Oregon economy. Arguing slow growth of UGB is arguing against what our community has expressed as important to us. I appreciate the point of farming near urbanization. Bringing urbanization to other nearby properties is part of the problem with prematurely developing near what is currently a rural and farmed area. And since applicant already changed zones, it exacerbates the problem even further. The city has annexed hundreds of EFU acres with hundreds more in the works, thousands apparently. Believing sprawl will likely reach an area in the next 20 years is not an appropriate argument to develop it, nor should decisions get based on possible future technologies which do not yet exist. Oregon's unique land use laws have protected it in such a way that it can be witnessed from space. Since 2000, Oregon has lost nearly 500,000 farm acres. The vast majority of scientists, even the IPCC, insist that if we haven't been working toward reduce harm and emissions in 30 years, we're looking at irreversible cascading collapses, some of which we're already witnessing. So I will just end this with, for future health and sustainability of our people, wildlife, and county, it's imperative that every decision this board makes asks, will this move us towards or away from emission reduction targets? And will this move us towards or away from biodiversity losses? I find development of large tracts of AG acres as this plan amendment and zone change request is unnecessary and will be inappropriate perversion of land use laws and intents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. All right. Is there anyone else with a raised hand? Okay, thank you.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Grace Wager. I live at 3340 Northeast Cruise Loop in Bend, and I work for Ben Redmond Habitat for Humanity. So I think there are many things to be concerned about with the rezoning of these parcels, but obviously where my expertise lies is in affordable housing, so that's what I will speak to. Rezoning to allow large, low-density, single-family homes directly contradicts Goal 10 of Oregon's land use planning laws, which state that plans shall encourage the availability of adequate numbers of needed housing units at price ranges and rent levels which are commensurate with the financial capabilities of Oregon households. And Deschutes County is falling woefully short of meeting this goal. The median household income in Deschutes County is just over $68,000, which by HUD standards means that a household in this income range could afford around $300,000 for a home. And as you are well aware, there are no homes that are in this price range, but especially not large lot single family homes. So I'm concerned about basically adhering to the Goal 10 laws. And these are laws that we have to follow in Oregon. So I urge you to consider that in your decision making. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak. Thanks.
Oh, no, Grace, thank you so much for speaking. We appreciate hearing from you today. Let's see, Stephanie, do we have anyone else on Zoom? Are there any phone calls? I've got one number, but no hand raised. Okay. All right. I don't want to end it too soon. Sometimes people pop up. It sometimes takes them a minute. Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Lewison, do you want to come up and provide your rebuttal? And you're allowed 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I did confirm it was 73%, and that number can be found on page 8 of it, at the applicant's Exhibit 5, which is our soil study.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
You know, it's always, there's always little things.
Yes, and sometimes those are just, inadvertent typos. I didn't even notice it, so I'm glad that you pointed it out. I do have one letter that I'll enter into the record. I don't have copies of all of this for you guys, and it's not necessary that you read through it right now anyway, but it's a letter response to the Bayard comments that were submitted both at your work session, and then they submitted relatively the same information today, but it seems to have been edited to apply to the present application, as opposed to the one they gave you at the work session was more general. And so I do have a letter. I'll just provide it for the record to respond to that. It identifies the location of where they live in relationship to the subject property, recognizing they are talking about more of a legislative issue, but one of the things that I want people to be aware of is they live on a MUA 10 piece of property, exactly the kind of zoning that we're asking for in a neighborhood that they're complaining could possibly be developed on this piece of private property that has no otherwise restrictions on its use in terms of resource values. So I think it's important, again, that the private property owners that we recognize are footing the bill for these applications in order to make their property available for urbanization for our community. The letter that they submitted to you asks who benefits from these applications. Well, first of all, I don't know when it became a dirty word for private property owners to benefit from protecting their property interests, but nevertheless, who benefits from these applications is the community. These property owners are paying for these planning efforts so that it makes the expansion easier when the time comes. And I do recognize that we don't know when that time will come, but the rezoning of these properties, if and for the time period when it does come, makes them available for urbanization, and they are the ones that are in the path of our infrastructure extensions. In addition, having these non-resource zoning designations on these properties also enables the state to more effectively pass these House bills that have brought these properties in for these affordable housing and these workforce housing projects. So the testimony from the Habitat for Humanity person, I apologize, I didn't get her name, but this proposal is consistent with providing more affordable housing, providing more housing for our community, and essentially providing a supply that can help bring the costs down for some of this housing. Goal 10 does not apply to this application, so I respect that she understands that it applies to housing, but it doesn't apply to the present application, not directly, in the sense that the county's comprehensive plan has been acknowledged through DLCD, and so the county's comprehensive plan complies with Goal 10, and the county's comprehensive plan allows for the rezoning of non-productive agricultural land to exception lands. So lastly, I can't urge you enough to understand that the comprehensive land use planning responsibilities between the cities and the counties to coordinate and cooperate, particularly on these urban fringe areas, it is imperative that these cooperative efforts take place so that it doesn't take 20 years to get a UGB and another 7 to 10 years to get vertical development on these properties that have come inside. We have only 8% of our population in our community can afford a home at the median price. We have to act now, and we have to use all of our tools. This is one of them. We have many other tools. And I see you guys out there every day making decisions to use those tools to help provide affordable housing. The county only has so many tools. The city has density. The county can't develop at that level of density. But this is one of the tools that you guys have. And you have others, but this is one of them, and I urge you to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for those comments. Nathan, do you want to step back up? Nathan, do you have any remarks that you would like to make at this time then?
Staff has no further comments.
Okay. And you did hear that Commissioner DeBonne will want to review this hearing and be part of the decision.
Okay. So at this stage of the hearing, there are 4 options moving forward. The board can continue the hearing to a date and time certain. We can close the oral portion of the hearing and leave the written record open to a date and time certain. We can close the hearing and schedule deliberations for a date and time to be determined, or we can close the hearing and commence deliberations.
So we know we aren't going to do option number 4. So that's off the table. And when is the final argument needed? I remember Ms. Lewis did say that they had originally applied for this April of 2022, so we're a year later.
Sure. So I think at this point what we need to do is determine whether or not we want to keep the record open and do a 7-7-7, or if the board or the applicant would request that we close the record at this point.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
I'd like to be heard on that point.
Yes.
I would ask that we close both the public hearing and the written record. Thank you. Oh, and set a date for deliberation.
Okay.
That works with Tony's schedule.
Right. Okay.
And staff would like to note, since if the record is being closed, we will need to confirm that no comments have come in via email or physically in our mailbox across the street. If we could take a moment just to do that real quick.
Sure. Why don't we do that? Are there any?
I mean, I'm pretty comfortable closing the oral portion of the hearing, but we frequently leave the written record open for a little longer just to allow people to, oftentimes.
Just if I could, sorry. My purpose in requesting it is that, again, we filed this application in April of last year. There's been ample time for people to comment. It's been publicly noticed, it's been in the paper, it's been individually noticed. We had 2 people comment today. I don't see a reason that the written record remain open. And we do want to bring this to a conclusion.
I appreciate that.
But
There are definitely, I mean, quite often until it comes here and a hearing starts, there's always people who are like, I hadn't heard about this before. And, you know, I mean, you know.
Correct. I'm certainly not trying to cut off public participation. We're just trying to reach an end.
Okay, so if we just closed the public hearing, or the public comments, and we had the written record out for 7, and then is it 7 more for rebuttal, and then we can do our deliberations? Does that still keep it in April?
That would probably push it back to middle of May, May 17th, if we did a 7 and 7 and 7.
Okay.
I would like to do a 777, but I could be persuaded the other way.
Okay, 777, you said rebuttal, final, when you say final legal argument, do you mean deliberations on the 20, it says April 26th on this memo. Does that not work?
For the 7 and 7 and 7, what we
Right.
look to is the new evidence and testimony phase ending April 12th.
Right?
Okay, so a week from today, the rebuttal phase ending April 19th, and then the final legal argument ending April 26th.
Right, so that keeps everything still in April.
Sure, so the dates that I listed here on this memo here are just based upon the staff's calendar and when we could begin to kind of think about scheduling. Of course, this will obviously depend on the board's schedule, and if there's meetings, I would need to confirm that with the board's admin staff as well. So these are just predictions. Final days would need to be determined after the hearing when I'm able to coordinate with the board staff.
Okay, because I see on the backside you're saying perhaps May 17th then. That's why, okay.
Correct, yeah, we would, if we did the
But
7th,
there is a possibility we could do it April 26th?
I can certainly look into that.
Okay, because I do respect, they've been working on this for a year.
So
do we-
moving forward, do we want to close the record now, or do we want to try to incorporate the 7 and 7 and 7 and schedule deliberations after that period?
I would say keep the written record open, and then, so that would be your item number 13, where we hopefully could meet on the 26th, if that's possible.
And if this will help, I think the applicant would be able to waive that last 7-day period so that
Okay.
we could do our final argument and our rebuttal during the same period. So that would help that.
Fairly predictable. It's fairly predictable what you would hear if we're going to hear more.
Right, okay, so that takes 1 week out of it. So then,
So we'll do a
Is that
hybrid
legal?
version then.
is that legal, that if they don't mind giving up that extra week?
If the applicant is agreeable.
Okay. Okay,
7 and 7?
yes.
7? Okay, and we'll look to schedule deliberations on April 26th.
Ooh. I won't be here.
Nope.
Okay.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
There.
Okay.
Well, we have to hope you're going to be somewhere really warm.
I will be.
Okay, so you'll be here.
I would have been somewhere warm, though. I'm going to be on an island off the coast of North Carolina, so it could be warm that time of year.
It could be, yes. Okay, all right, so we're good with April 26th then. Okay, that's good. I feel better that, yes, Will, do you have?
Hey, good morning. For the record, your planning manager, Will Groves. I just want to let you know that, we do need to coordinate with board staff and look at availability. Obviously, this is a board priority. We'll bring it forward as quickly as possible. April 26th looks favorable. At the same time, we want to, without formally setting, we don't want to if we can avoid it, formally setting that date at
Okay.
this point. But it'll be a very strong target for us.
Okay, I just, I think sometimes when you, as I've said before, sometimes government takes so long to get something accomplished, and the fact that they applied a year ago in April. So that's appreciated well.
Yeah, certainly. It would, the only thing that would bump it out of the way would be other board priorities.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, if we're segueing out of the quasi-judicial process to I do want to pick up that legislative discussion again and just ask staff. I'm particularly looking at Will. What kind of progress have we made with communications with the city of Bend about a UAR expansion or this overlay concept or other things? And it's highly relevant to today's discussion about how this hearing is going, because as we heard, the majority of the concerns that were expressed were about wanting to see orderly urban development that facilitates the offering of abundant and affordable housing. And I actually think that's it seems like that's the applicant's intent as well. But we're stuck in this two-step process where, we're putting land out there into the MUA category, and then we do need that second step or assurances to be sure that these lands are going to go, are going to kind of realize that vision that I think is shared among most of the people who are tracking this case.
Yes, thank you. And in response to the previous concerns the board had raised on this issue at a similar hearing, we are meeting, our planning staff is meeting with the city's planning staff on next Thursday to begin those discussions.
Thank you. And some of the some of the concepts that'll be discussed are the UAR. And what are you calling this overlay concept?
Exploring the notion of an overlay zone. So, again, very conceptual at this point, but something like this could work to, and again, very conceptual, would be that either all properties within some radius of cities would either, as if they came in for a land division, they would have to be clustered to ensure that, that the clustering provision would be used rather than a straight 10-acre division. You might have provisions that would require preservation of infrastructure corridors as part of that. In the alternative, you could apply it only to properties that were going through these types of plan amendment zone changes, so it wouldn't affect existing property owners. That would be a relatively smaller lift and would address the concerns that you've heard today in significant fashion. But again, all these things are very much at the conceptual stage, and seeing to what extent the City of Bend's interested in participating in that.
Well, it seems like from Ms. Lewis's presentation today, the fact from the 2010 ask of 8,500 acres, and then they only brought in the 2,308. So there's 6,100 acres out there that maybe it would have helped if they could have already been brought in 16. And maybe we wouldn't be in such a affordable housing crunch, because when you don't have enough property, then it makes everything more expensive.
Yeah, certainly, and I would definitely welcome, we share the board's concern in planning, certainly providing needed housing for the community is vital to our interests as well. And to the extent Ms. Lewis would like to give us a call if she had any ideas, anything we could do on the county's end, staff would be glad to hear about it.
Oh, great. Good idea. Thank you, Will. Okay, so we're good then. We'll hope to shoot for April, and it might happen, and then again, it might not. Thank you.
Now that the open record period is set, staff would like to provide some instructions on submittal for the open record period. If that's okay. So as we discussed, there'll be two phases in the open record period. We'll have new evidence and testimony, and we'll have the rebuttal. All submittals should be addressed to me. For my email submittals, use my email address, nathaniel.miller@deschutes.org. Any electronic submittals must be received by the county server by 4 p.m. Please do not wait until the last minute to submit your evidence and testimony. Please note that staff will not retrieve information from a website link or a personal cloud storage device. And just to recap those dates, we have the new evidence and testimony phase. The deadline is Wednesday, April 12th at 4 p.m. And the rebuttal phase, which is going to end on Wednesday, April 19th at 4 p.m.
That's 4 p.m.
4 p.m., correct.
Okay. And they must arrive by 4 p.m.
That is correct. Yep.
And sometimes things just don't arrive, so send them early. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioners.
And thank you again for your 5 years with Deschutes County. Okay, we are now to our next public hearing on Four Peaks. Good morning, thank you. Oh, yes, I did one. Yours is nicer than mine, thank you very much.
Of course. For the record, Rachel Vickers, Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. The item before the board today is a outdoor mass gathering permit for the Four Peaks Music Festival.
Thank you. This is the time and place set for a hearing regarding file number 247-22-000675. Oh, OMG. This is a request for a multi-day outdoor music festival for an event in June of 2024. Staff will outline the hearing procedures that will be followed.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Adair. The hearings body, the Board of County Commissioners, in this case, will take testimony and receive written evidence concerning a quasi-judicial application for Four Peaks Presents LLC for an outdoor mass gathering permit to allow a multi-day music festival in June of 2024. All testimony shall be directed to the hearings body. At the conclusion of this hearing, the hearings body will deliberate towards a decision or continue the hearing or deliberations to a date and time certain. The hearing will proceed as follows. First, staff will explain Zoom, including remote and in-person participation. Then staff will provide a brief report regarding the application. Second, the applicant will present their testimony and evidence. Third, any other interested parties or agencies will then present their testimony and evidence. Fourth, the applicant is the party bearing the burden of proof will then be afforded opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. And finally, staff will be afforded the opportunity to make any closing comments. I will note that the board has established time limits. There's a 20-minute time limit for the applicant and a 3-minute time limit for testimony. This is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and remote participants. The hearing will function as follows. If you are attending in person and wish to testify, please fill out a sign-up sheet and submit it to the board secretary, Brenda, to the left of the dais. Vice Chair Adair will call up in-person participants for testimony. We have two types of remote participants, those attending through Zoom with a computer and those attending through Zoom with a telephone. Now we'll cover some important tools to be aware of if you're participating over Zoom. If you're participating using a computer, the mute button and raise hand buttons are located to the bottom of your screen. If you're participating over phone, you will dial *6 to mute and unmute yourself and *9 to raise and lower your hand. For remote participants, when we are ready for remote testimony, you can raise your hand using the raised hand button over Zoom and pressing *9 on your phone. Once we are ready for testimony, you will be elevated from attendee status to panelist and your audio will be automatically unmuted. Before beginning your testimony, please provide your first and last name and your mailing address. Once complete, you'll return to attendee status and your audio will be muted. The next person wishing to testify will be selected. The process will repeat itself until all those participating by computer or phone have testified. Should the county's internet connection be interrupted, we will attempt to get back online as soon as possible. If this happens, please give us a couple minutes to reactivate the public hearing before you attempt to link or call back in. If your own connection gets interrupted, please attempt to join back using the same link or phone number you used initially. And as a reminder, if you're testifying over Zoom, please state your first and last name and mailing address. It is our responsibility as staff and the chair to conduct an orderly hearing. Any testimony or behavior which is inappropriate will be addressed and may result in that member of the public being removed from the hearing. In addition to oral testimony, if anyone has written testimony to submit, please hand to staff. If you are in person, please submit your written testimony to me after your testimony, or if you are participating remotely, my email address can be seen on the screen. At this time, I'm going to ask if there are any objections to the format of the hearing. If yes, please raise your hand if you're in person or use the raise hand function if you're attending remotely.
Stephanie, do we have any raised hands? No.
All right, Commissioners, seeing none, I will move on. A full written version of the hearing procedures is available at the table at the side of the room. Commissioner Dare, I will now return to the script and note that commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, prior hearing observations, biases, or conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Rachel. Does any commissioner have anything to disclose? And if so, please state the nature of same and whether you can proceed.
I have nothing to disclose, and I can proceed.
And I have nothing to disclose, and I may proceed. Does any party wish to challenge any commissioner, member of the hearings body, based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? Are there any online, Stephanie? Thank you. As no challenges are presented prior to opening the hearing, does anyone have any procedural objections to the public hearing? None? Okay, thank you. As no challenges are presented seeing none, the hearing is now open and staff will proceed with a brief staff report. Back to you, Rachel.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Dare. The subject property is located on a 150-acre parcel at 21085 Knott Road, and it's just south of the City of Bend's urban growth boundary. The property is developed with a single-family dwelling and other accessory structures. The surrounding area consists of small-scale farm and residential uses. Setup is scheduled to begin June 15th and tear down to be fully completed by June 24th. This event will take place from June 20th through June 23rd. This will total to a 4-day event with 5 days of setup and 1 day of teardown. The applicant is requesting access to the site prior to June 15th to help coordinate with deliveries and site preparation such as vegetation and rock removal, which has been approved in previous years. This 2024 permit is for an estimated 2,000 persons. On Monday's work session, Commissioner Chang requested information on how or if the events have changed since the COVID-19 pandemic. While the applicant is prepared to address these comments in more detail, staff will note that this festival has received approval at this location from 2016 to 2019 and 9 years prior to that location in Tumalo. At this specific location, the permit has covered 2,500 to 2,800 attendees.
2,500?
Yeah, 2,500 and 2,800. You can see, the specific numbers up on the screen.
Oh, thank you.
It looks like it increased. 2016 was 2,500, and then it gradually increased to 2,800, and this year is the 2,000. The relevant code criteria for outdoor mass gatherings is located within Deschutes County Code Section 8.16. This slide highlights the code provisions that must be met in order to approve the application per DCC 816-190. Based on review of the application materials, staff believes all of these provisions have been met. However, to ensure compliance, conditions of approval have been added. Staff will note that the applicant is requesting a waiver from the ambulance requirements, which have been approved in previous years. Bend Fire Station number 303 is approximately 2 miles away from the location, and the applicant has provided a letter in support of the ambulance waiver from the Bend Fire Department. While DCC 816-180 only requires a 10-day notice to other county departments and publishing to the bulletin, notice of public hearing was sent to the county departments and surrounding property owners on March 17th and published to the bulletin on March 19th. Staff received 2 public comments in opposition since our work session on Monday. Those comments raised concerns surrounding safety and security, fire risk, traffic and trespassing, and general disruption to their daily lives and livestock. And both those comments have been uploaded to the record as of yesterday. At the conclusion of this public hearing, the board has 4 options to move forward: continue the hearing to a date and time certain, close the oral portion of the hearing and leave the written record open to a date and time certain, close the hearing and commence deliberations, or close the hearing and schedule deliberations for a date and time to be determined. If members of the public have any, oh,
Kim, do we want to make a comment about Commissioner DeBonne on this one also?
My understanding is you would probably do deliberations today. I don't, and on these types of permit hearings, normally we don't leave the record period opened, and you could potentially do deliberations today.
Okay, so he,
It's up to you. I don't believe he had any expectation, or I'm not aware of any intention to review that. But if it remains open, he certainly could do that.
okay, all right, thank you.
He explicitly expressed a desire to engage in the deliberations on the last item.
On the last item, he did. For this one,
Didn't
I
say
did not
anything particular about this one.
That's correct.
Okay,
sorry.
sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to clarify that.
No worries. All right. If members of the public have any questions after the hearing has concluded, my contact information can be seen on the screen. Commissioner's staff is available for questions.
The two comments that were received
Yes.
just recently, are those adjacent landowners, or, kind of where are they in relation to the subject property?
Yes, so one is directly south of the subject property. They've submitted similar comments in previous years. And then one is a new property owner that lives, I don't believe directly adjacent, but it's nearby. It's within the mailing radius, which is 750 feet.
Okay, so I have the letter from Pape.
Yes.
Who's the other one from?
It is from, sorry, let me look up the name. I believe it was a Trevor Downs. Yes. And yeah, in his letter, he stated that he's moved since the last event, so this would be his first event.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And that's the one within 700 feet?
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, and then the one from Pape's, they're directly south.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Did you have any other information then?
No, unless I'm available for questions if you have any others. Or we can go into the applicant's presentation.
I think so. That would
Okay.
be fine. Applicant's presentation would be great.
Sounds good.
And you did mention 20 minutes?
Yes, 20 minutes for the applicant and 3 minutes for testimony if there is any.
Okay, great. We do have someone who wants to testify.
Good morning. Hi, thank you. For the record, I'm Stacy Koff, owner and operator of the Four Peaks Music Festival since 2006. And just to be clear, one little mistake in the timeline, 2016 we were not at this property. We were still in Tumalo. So we took over the Stevenson Ranch property in 2017. And I'm not sure where some of those numbers came from, but the extended, or the OMG, outdoor mass gathering, goes up to 3,000 people. And each year we've had that granted, but I've put restrictions on ourselves knowing that we didn't want the full 3,000 people there in those particular years. So we sold a lot less tickets than that, but then with a certain amount of other people on site, like volunteers, vendors, staff, we might have had upwards of 2,000, give or take, on those years. So just to clarify that. I don't really have a large presentation or much to say that's not already written in the materials and in the permit and been approved by the 4 county offices. So I guess I will just open it up to your questions and concerns, other than the fact that I've been doing this for almost 15 years now, barring a COVID break. And in 2021, we had a event permit for the property, so we had 500 people out there in 21 just to continue the event within a smaller scale and COVID confines of what the event could do in 21 and be. So that's all for now.
And then we'd actually seen your event for this year, and then you decided to postpone?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, just a couple of internal reasons, and also just with a lot of the other events going on in town and some other constraints we had, I decided to postpone to 24. And the hearing date was pretty, I can't remember exactly when the hearing date was, but it was cutting it close to be able to plan for this kind of event.
And so you have operated the Four Peaks Music Festival at this specific location in 2017, 2018, and 2019.
Mm-hmm, correct.
And maybe a mini event in 2021.
In 21, a mini, yes, we called it Mini Four Peaks.
In terms of kind of the setup, the stages, the support services, and things like that, there's not significant changes between the proposed year 2024 and those other years.
Correct. Well, in 2017, we had a little different layout, and we learned from some of that based on some of the community response, some of the neighbors' concerns. So we moved boundary lines, we moved stage sight lines, we moved speakers and things to really work with the neighbors and the community. And then in 2019 to 21, or sorry, 18 to 19, it stayed the same layout, but we also then moved the boundary to the west and north versus east and south to then go even farther from those neighboring properties.
I know that there was concern about, or there were some questions about the ambulance service, and kind of whether you would have an ambulance on site or whether having Bend Fire just 2 miles away was sufficient. In those prior years, were there any emergency medical incidents where an ambulance was needed? Where an ambulance needed to show up?
Right. No, not at all. And we all believed, including Drew Norris at the fire department, that an ambulance was safer placed where it normally lives, 1.5 miles or 2 miles away, to be able to access the rest of the community if need be that weekend. And then if we needed it, it could come onto our site exactly where it needed to go versus be on site somewhere and try to maneuver within the site. Same with any fire trucks or other vehicles. We have a great emergency access road point on the property to be able to come and go. The fences are such that they can just blow down, they can go through the fences, so it's not any permanent structures or anything that would be in the way of that. So yes, the ambulance has really never been needed, and I know that it's been written in the ordinance since the beginning of time for me doing this, but it's never been needed, and we've always gotten the waiver.
It looks like there's a pretty good network of roads throughout the overall property. So, one of the concerns that was raised about was about fire ignition, and from that perspective, if there was some kind of ignition in the center of the festival activity, there's a good network of roads out from there on the property for people to be able to intercept fires.
Correct. We have 20-foot and sometimes 30-foot wide roads within the entire property. And the good news is there's a pond right in the center of the property, essentially right near the main stage, that maintains half full, if not more full, during the event, and I guess probably around the event too. So we make sure that that's accessible, and we have water directly across from the property to access for any fire hoses or any water needs that is provided by Evian, the private water service.
And this is this is a working farm that has there's irrigation.
We actually put some in, yes. So there's irrigation now underground, very shallow, but it's all there, yes. So we can just tap into it year to year. Yeah. And that's one of the improvements we did for the property owner, as well as some new fencing and another gate or two for ingress and egress that we did, I believe, in 2019. And what I'll say, not directly to this comment, but just in general, this is a family event that's taken place for a very long time that a lot of the community loves to have. It's 6 miles from downtown, it's very accessible. There's been no violations. There has just been a lot of joy brought to a lot of people's lives over and over each summer for this. And it was tough, of course, during COVID not to be able to hold it, but doing the mini festival in 21 was a great thing to also see that we could do it small scale and full scale on this property and really just keep it going for the community.
So you did have it in 21 with what, 500?
The mini, mm-hmm.
But you didn't do it in 22?
Mm-mm. It was still iffy with COVID and requirements and just all the stuff going on in our climate.
Okay. All right. So actually it's missed 2 years then? Missed 22 and 23. Mm-hmm. So now we're talking 24.
Right.
And you're back to 2000, though you said you never sold as many tickets as were on our notice?
Right, correct. So we could, technically the outdoor mass gathering goes up to 3,000, but we've never used it to that capacity, and I don't see that happening in 24 either. It's just more of a kind of an intimate, family-friendly, all-day type music festival where I think the biggest year was 2017, I believe, like I said, and there were still not 3,000 people there. And because it is overnight camping and we really limit the in and out of coming and going of cars because we encourage people to stay, and also people that are coming from out of town obviously stay, but it's also, we charge for coming and going, so we try to limit the amount of traffic as well as once people are set in a campsite, they're not going to leave. So the traffic issues are pretty much next to none. I mean, we have certified flaggers on the road, we have signs on the road, and most of the time the flaggers are sort of bored. There's 1 or 2 high times where people come, and then we stagger things. We allow the RVs, the larger vehicles, to come in earlier, and people just stagger throughout the weekend, and there's not this huge mass exodus on Sunday. A lot of people come for one day, and then it just staggers. So I remember I got a call from, we've been in touch with the middle school around there. Even though school's out, it was one year we had it a week earlier in June to where school was just getting out. And they called me afterwards and thanked me, and they said, we didn't even know there was a festival going on, really. So, but this is after the schools are out this year.
Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Okay, great.
Thank you so
Stacy.
much. Yeah.
Okay. We do have someone who signed up to make a comment. Kathy Miner? Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And Commissioner Chang, I haven't presented before you. I've come every year that they've asked for a permit and made a public presentation. I live on the property adjacent immediately to the east of the property, and we are greatly impacted by this event. My house, not my property, but my house is within 500 feet of the main stage. So kind of to tell you a little bit about our neighborhood. It's a surrounding neighborhood of small farms averaging between 5 and 20 acres each. There is one large farm to the south of the property, and it's owned by the Papes. This area has gone through several changes since the event's been there. One is the fire district regulations have changed, so that there we have a tree corridor through the Pape property, and we have 2 acres of our property are forested. We don't forest it, but we have pine trees and old growth on the property. And just because I'm the only one here presenting and we had 2 other people doesn't mean that the neighbors are in agreement that this occurs. They're just kind of tired and frustrated that they have presented and come to the commissioner meeting, and yet permits are being issued for this event, even though they're in opposition to it. The other thing with this property is it is now part of the mule deer migration zone. So it is an area where there's a wildlife pattern that goes through it, and since it's one of the only 2 large properties in that area, it is an important source of food for birds of prey and for wildlife. In the past years, I've presented, and my daughters have come and presented. My daughters have participated in 4-H and FFA, and how it impacts our livestock. This has been a cost to the homeowners and the community that we have to have the brunt of. We're not reimbursed for the cost that it is. I know the Papes always provide extra water trucks on their property for fire prevention in case it were to happen. We have had the last 2 years our irrigation system, which is Arnold Irrigation System. They are low man on totem pole for the water rights, and our water irrigation has been turned off early. Last year we were told that the irrigation would be turned off in June. Unfortunately, because it was a wet year, we did get 2 weeks into June before the irrigation turns off. So the pond that Stacy was talking about that is fed by irrigation water, that water would be turned off and that pond would not be full. This last year, we haven't heard this year about the water, but we did get an email from Arnold Irrigation saying that the water supplies are still low and they're uncertain how many acreage foot that we will get and for how long. So our trees in that corridor have been dry from lack of irrigation for over 2 years, and they foresee that continuing. They anticipate 5 years before the water levels are back to an appropriate level. If we continue to have water. And as I mentioned, wildlife refuge in the past, when this concert's been there, the wildlife have disappeared. The Pape family has an amazing wildlife corridor they've built on their property, and I've had the privilege to be able to ride my horse out there. And the wildlife there, they've had wolves and all kinds of stuff that come there that are unique to the area, have dispersed, and it takes 6 months for those wildlife to return to that corridor that's adjacent to the property. In previous years, I have been allowed to attend the event if I chose to. And in 2017, the year that was the largest, was the last time I was over there during the event. And I took pictures and documented numerous violations. I know Stacy says there's been no violations, but since they self-monitor, why would they report violations? So I took pictures and I documented that in the 2017 testimony. And the violations included fire violations. All food trucks are supposed to be registered and comply with all accordance. And I took pictures of multiple pop-ups where people who were camping were selling food. There were fire extinguishers were hard to find throughout the camping area. There was propane, gasoline, and barbecue pits on grassland because this is a pasture and it's not irrigated now, so that pasture is extremely dry. And there's cooking underneath canvases with awnings on campsites. We took pictures of candles that were left burning and unattended while the campers were at the event. We found kids unattended cooking underneath the canvas tents and actually burning food. I have a video recording of them laughing about burning their dinner. The noise is frequently more than 50 decibels, and we call whenever it's exceeding, especially in the evening when we're trying to relax and go to sleep. Alcohol use, there's to be no outside alcohol, and yet there's beer cans tossed around. And the one time when I was there, I overheard Stacy on an intercom asking volunteers to come up and pick up beer cans and discarded alcohol containers. One event, the first year, we had a camper. We used to have an irrigation ditch along the east side of the property. It's closed in now. But a camper was high on cocaine and saw the lights in a greenhouse, climbed over the fence, fell into the irrigation ditch, and the property owners had to fish him out. So they pushed her back over the fence and sent her on her way, and that was reported. Let's see, we've had violations, well, not violations, but we've had campers because it is a farm property without residents right there. They don't know where to have their Ubers come, so they give them our address, and we have Uber vehicles coming up to our property. We have people loitering at the base of our property waiting for Uber riders to pick them up. People come and they turn around on our property, and it's a single lane driveway. It's a long quarter-mile driveway with big camping rigs, and they're trying to back out onto a busy knot road to turn around. In the previous years, some of the commissioners have made comments. Ex-Commissioner Bainey said it's unfortunate that the event is here for the livestock because it impacts them so significantly. Ex-Commissioner Henderson said that having the vet is definitely not being a good neighbor. Commissioner DeBone said that he was bound by law to allow the permit being issued, even though there were significant concerns about livestock and agriculture and other residents close in volume. I disagree that we're bound to issue this permit based on legal reasons. There's been numerous times that Four Peaks has not been able to maintain the contracts with the example I've committed that I've explained to you. I feel that the permit should not be issued because of the impact to the community. There are better sites for this, like the fairground, where there's not small farms directly connected and up against the property lines. And last year, the last time when it was a smaller event, I personally felt bullied by Four Peaks. The day that campers were moving in, the Four Peaks sent an officer to my door to tell me that if my dogs wandered onto the property, that the dogs would be detained and I would have a $3,000 fine. And then every time I went out, I live on a farm and I have a garden. And every time I'd come out, there would be a drone coming from the event that would fly over and hover the whole time I was outside. So I was not allowed onto the venue to obviously take pictures and evidence of violations of the contract. If this permit is to be issued, I would like considerations taken into account for changes in our environment and our economy. One is our health care. Our health care, we have huge staffing problems at the hospital. I worked there. We've closed 20 beds. Our emergency department is totally impacted because we have patients that have to board there, which decreases the availability to emergencies. I would like to ensure that that ambulance is not removed from that list, because those patients, if there are any patients that need to be transported to the hospital, they may have to be transported to Redmond or to Prineville to receive care. The next one is fire. I know the fire district has checked off things, but because of the irrigation issues with Arnold's irrigation, turning off irrigation earlier, I would like them to provide a water truck on the property to ensure that if there is a fire, it will be taken care of and that dust will be maintained, especially since the water is off and it is incredibly dry. I would also like to have more fire extinguishers on the camping. So I would like to see 1 per 200 campers. If there's 3 campers per site, that would be 1 fire extinguisher for 67 sites. I think that's a reasonable request. I would like those to be clearly marked and dispersed throughout the camping area. As far as security goes, security typically at mass gathering events is 1 per 100 people. I would like to, because of what I told you, what I've seen at these events, there typically in the past have been 3 to 5 paid security guards, and all the rest are volunteers that are trained once they're there. I would like to have all the 1 to 100 guards be trained security guards that are experienced so that they can help manage the campsites to make sure that candles and fires and cooking and children are properly monitored, and that the security team, if there's going to be volunteers, because the majority of the security team in the past has been volunteers, if they want to continue to have those volunteers, they volunteer in exchange for free admission. So they're not included in your ticket count. But if they want to continue to have those to manage parking and directing campers and ensuring that the armbands are on people entering the beer court, those would be volunteers and not the security guards. The other thing is I would like not to allow them to be on the property early for setup. It's already disruptive to the farm animals and the agricultural zoning in the environment, so I would request that that not be issued. And I would also like to ask, we were on vacation when this permit notice came out. This is not usually the time of year that the permit hearings have been heard. So my husband was unable to get time off work and to form a rebuttal, and he would like to have time to be allowed to do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathy.
I have one or two questions, and maybe some questions for staff as well. The one I specifically wanted to ask about, the point that I specifically wanted to ask about was the wildlife migration zone. Can you kind of share what species we're talking about, and are these?
The current one is the mule deer, and I know that it's more a winter, but it does impact that area. Because it does trample down grazing and the ability for that to reseed and repopulate. And for other birds, we have a lot of birds of prey. We have bald eagles and owls out there. And when the event occurs, we actually have a lot more rodents on our property because they're coming over to get away from all the noise. My barn cats love it. There's dead carcasses everywhere, but so it does impact a lot of other animals besides that endangered mule deer population.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess the question I have, maybe this is more for staff, but if there are reported violations or kind of complaints, then who investigates those, or how does that how does the enforcement work?
Would you like me to go back so they can to answer?
I think. Do you have any more questions for Kathy?
A whole bunch of things that could potentially be mitigated, but I don't know if I have any more further questions for you about them. But I definitely am interested in asking the applicant about them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
So I can address some of those. So County Code 816, 330, and 340. They highlight the compliance and the violation standards for outdoor mass gatherings. There's also 816, 300 is outdoor mass gathering enforcement. In the past, there's been conditions of approval added to these events, and part of that includes, sorry, let me check. There's some inspections done by the fire department prior to this. However, as far as, and someone might be able to jump up, as far as compliance after the event, I'm not aware of any.
Or during the event.
Yeah.
Well, the last sentence in the packet says that staff recommends a condition of final approval is to not permit narcotic or dangerous drugs on the premises.
Yeah, so that's in the county code. So unlike alcohol, so alcohol per the county code cannot be brought on the premises unless it's licensed by the state through an OLCC license. However, drugs do not have that provision. They're just not allowed in the county code under any sort of provisions.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the board. Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. I haven't looked at it's been several years since Four Peaks has been issued an outdoor mass gathering. I think to the extent that the board has questions about the performance at the last event, I think it'd be worthwhile for us to, look at our record. Off the cuff, I'm not aware of complaints that were filed. Outdoor mass gathering is it's not subject to zoning. This was a carve out, so it's a kind of a standalone use subject to certain responsibilities and requirements. So I think Eric and I could revisit in terms of risk management any expressed concerns that were raised a few years ago at their last event, and then provide context if you wanted to hold off on issuing a decision today. But as Rachel noted, there are certain responsibilities that come with executing an outdoor mass gathering. Many of those provisions were highlighted in Rachel's report, but to the extent that the board is interested in what occurred or what was reported a few years ago, staff is more than willing to revisit that and report back so you have an understanding not only of what the neighbor has expressed in terms of compatibility challenges, but what was formally submitted during or after that event occurred.
I'm as much or more interested in the future. Kind of, if this event is issued a permit, I'm just trying to understand how enforcement of the conditions work, and I think I heard you say, Peter, that our code compliance staff are not the people who are doing inspections and kind of responding real time if there's complaints.
Right. Thank you for that statement and question. I just wanted to clarify that outdoor mass gatherings are not regulated by zoning. It's subject to Title VIII, and so I'd want to revisit the conditions of approval. I have not. What's being recommended or what was recommended in the past, but I believe to the extent that complaints are expressed at the time of the outdoor mass gathering, that's happening in real time to the sheriff's office. But Eric, you may have follow-up remarks as well.
Well, in 21, that was 500, so did it even go through the building department? Didn't it go through Eric?
Yeah, it went through the risk management process because it was under 500. As part of that permit process, majority of the conditions of approval were reinstated. I worked with Stacy, and as part of approving that permit process, over 90% of the requirements were part of that permit. There were a couple of complaints from neighbors that year. I forwarded them to Stacy. I have to look back at emails to see what the response was. I think one was a noise. Somebody complained. I can't remember if it was after 10 o'clock or the nature of that. But I'm happy to work with CDD to see if I can provide those communications.
Yeah, and I can provide maybe a bit more insight. A lot of the conditions, such as the one crowd control or one traffic control per 250, we work into the conditions of approval that the names and the contact information who will be working those positions are sent to staff before the event. So that's part of the monitoring of this. But.
And proposals, in our staff memo, it describes how proposals are reviewed and approved by environmental health, the Bend Fire Department, county health, and the sheriff's office. Are any of those entities responding real time if there are complaints about, hey, this food operation doesn't look like it's sanitary or something like that? how, I guess I'm still trying to understand how, if there's a real-time complaint, how that gets checked out.
Is environmental health there? That's the question. Do they inspect it over the weekend? Like randomly walk in and inspect?
My understanding, and Eric, you can fill in any blanks that I accidentally omit, but there's, as Rachel noted, there's a point of contact when this event is operational, so that in real time, if there's concerns about food or illegal, underage drinking or any of the, security, and those complaints are made in real time. The corresponding agency, it might start with the sheriff's office, has the ability to contact that individual and understand the circumstances that are being raised. Prior to the event, the outdoor mass gathering permittee has to get the requisite permits from environmental health, has to get the right authorizations for handling traffic that is using, has to have traffic control tools in place to ensure that the access to the subject property is safe and operational. So coming to the question is, I think to the extent that there's a complaint in real time, there's all of the requisite departments have a contact, and if there's a complaint, then there's the ability to contact that individual to get to the root of the matter. I'm not aware, and it's been a few years, of course, since Four Peaks has had an outdoor mass gathering of complaints in the moment. I don't recall them coming to the community development department. Instead, as Eric noted, that it may have gone through risk. But staff is certainly.
Did the 1 year because it was 500.
Yeah, we can certainly follow up and have a better understanding of what was complained and how it was coordinated ultimately.
Yeah, and I can also just add that the 4 signatures from environmental health, sheriff, and I'm forgetting the last one, but they either submitted comments that they're just in support of the project and added their signatures that they had no concerns. So there was no follow-up with maybe compliance issues that they had seen in previous years. But I'd be happy to follow back up with them.
Okay.
I would personally prefer, I would like to hear back what has actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
As Kathy mentioned, a lot of her neighbors, well, we haven't had this for a couple years, but a lot of her neighbors, the situation out there with Arnold has changed. So that's an impact. We don't know what it's going to look like, but it could be really dry. And if there isn't the water there that really needs to be there, we need to this is a year away, isn't it? Isn't that, so it's like we're thinking a year away, how many things could happen by then? And maybe we do need to know more facts, more research. Kathy, you have your hand up. Do you want to make another?
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
I just want to say that the process of reporting on a weekend is almost impossible. I have called the formal process. You have to go to the Deschutes County website and you have to look at multiple places to be able to find the form to submit it, and the form is not user-friendly. So the general population is not going to use it for a noise complaint. And when we have called for that, the police say, do you want us to come out? We're really busy. Or I've called the county commissioner's office and it's the weekend, and they're like, we'll get back to you on Monday. Well, the event's over, so how can you do a real-time audit or evaluation for things I'm observing? There is no contact. The contact I was given is Stacy's security.
Okay.
Like they're going to report something.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, the idea would be for them to take care of it. On water and fire, I do want to point out that this is the proposed dates. It's a year from June, so we have no idea what the snowpack and precipitation is going to be like in between now and then. But early June or mid-June is generally if you're going to have irrigation water from Arnold Irrigation District, that is the time you're probably going to have the water. It's later in the season when you would be cut off, and
We were cut off the second week of June. It is the lowest priority. I'm sorry, I'm talking.
Yes.
And kind of along the same lines, or mid-June is within fire season. It is the lowest risk time where we typically have the most resources available to respond. I've expressed a lot of concerns to our staff at the Fair and Expo Center about holding the fair in early to mid-August, which is typically a time where fire suppression resources in the region are often deployed to other parts of the state or other parts of the western United States. So I definitely want to ask about some of these potential mitigation ideas. A water truck might, that may be a very appropriate fire suppression response or mitigation measure.
Yeah, and sorry, I can speak a bit to that. So in the past, there's been a condition of approval that's been added. So Stacy mentioned there's an irrigation pond on the property. And a condition of approval has been if that irrigation pond is less than 50% filled, then a water truck shall be provided. So.
But having the water in the pond is one thing. Do you have a pump that you're going to get the water out to where the fire is? That's the other side of the story.
Yeah, I might let
a water
Stacy
truck
address
might be a lot more well received by the community.
Procedurally, how does this work? Do we bring the applicant back up to
Yeah, so
do more comments, or?
Yeah, now that testimony, I believe, if it's over, then the applicant, I believe based on our time limits, is afforded 5 minutes of rebuttal, and then staff will be available for additional questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
Hold on, I do believe there might be some more public comment online.
That we do? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Hello? Let's see, I think she's still on mute.
Hi there.
Hello?
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good morning, Commissioners Adair and Chang and staff. And my name is Justine Faneroff. I'm an attorney here in Bend, Oregon. In addition to being an attorney, I'm also a master's in public health. And so I'd like to address two aspects of the festival, specifically the community-based celebration perspective, which when we look at things in a public health way, we look at things from a population level. And so I heard testimony against potentially the event occurring, and I want to speak a little bit about the benefits of this kind of event occurring. I heard Ms. Koff reference that it's a family event, and I want to let y'all know that I joined the festival 2 years ago with my mom, who's 73 years old, and I would say her accessibility is quite limited. And we had the most wonderful time. We observed lots of families, a very diverse community orientation, and people seem to be having a really good time. I've attended hundreds of outdoor festivals. I want to say that what I saw at Four Peaks Festival was that it was a relatively small festival. It felt very community oriented. It felt very fun and engaging. I also felt extremely safe there. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about living in Bend. I like feeling safe. I like feeling that I'm a part of community, and I like having fun. So those three core things really made me enjoy the festival. And as I said, my mom was there with me, and she's in her mid-70s, and she had a wonderful time too. We found that the ticket prices were really reasonable. So when I speak to a matter of population level interest, I find accessibility very important. I also heard a lot about volunteers. I know this is a community run and managed event. I know that Ms. Koff has put a tremendous amount of time and energy and care and passion in the event. And not only is she vested, but the Bend community is vested. And so the volunteers that join really enjoy the opportunity to serve and be present with their friends, with their families, with people that travel from out of town. And I understand that this is a place where people feel comfortable. And that's really important, especially in a town that's grown a lot demographically over the past 10 years, that people find a place where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they have fun, and where they can be with their family. I love the location. It's close enough to Bend, but it also feels like I'm getting a little bit out in the country. And I heard the concerns of the neighbors, and I feel that the concerns are very interesting and valid. And I'd love there to be more communal connection and capacity to discuss and come to agreement rather than a feeling of conflict among festival goers and the neighbors. I think there's a lot of work that we can do to make sure that everybody feels safe and everybody has fun and everybody enjoys the festival. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak on support of Four Peaks Presents Festival in 2024 and beyond.
Thank you, Justine, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, address, please.
Yes, 2474 Northwest Hemingway Street, Bend 97703.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, is there anyone else? Stephanie? All right.
So rebuttal?
Yes. Okay, sorry about that.
Hi. Again, thank you again, Stacy Koff. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'll start by saying in real time and before the festival, the code enforcement comes out, fire department comes out, health department comes out. Who else is there? Environmental. All four agencies basically show up before, once or twice, during the event, and then random OLCC will show up at the event, and we let them in. Sometimes people there don't know that they're coming, so it's not like we scramble to get anything changed or ready for anybody that's coming on site. As I said before, we have had no violations. Every year at about 10:01, I believe, the sheriff's office is called because there are places open on the weekend. Obviously, the sheriffs are working around the clock. And they come out, they assess. We would love them to join us. We allow them on the property, and they essentially go about their way because our decibel levels are within range. And we drop them from 10 to midnight if we are having, I think in the past we've had a silent disco, which goes a little later, and then some acoustic music in a tent that goes until midnight. And those decibel levels are dropped from the daytime music, of course, after 10 p.m. The water, again, we have Avion water sourced. So we have access to that water. We have had a water truck on site in the past for dust mitigation, although you never know what's going to happen in June of 24. So obviously we will comply with whatever we need to there and have a water truck or have the pond full or both if needed, as well as the source across the street for Avion water. Trying to think of the other concerns, if you have questions before I go on.
The fire you kind of upping the ratios of fire extinguishers.
Fire extinguishers, I don't have a problem with that. They live on most of the tents, so the music tents, we have them at. The food vendors obviously have them, and we definitely comply to the amount of tents before you need a 10-foot break between another tent. So I think it's 70 feet of tent, and then you have to have a 10-foot break. So we comply with all of those, and that's what the health inspector or the food safety, I'm maybe not saying that perfectly right. And the code inspectors come out and make sure we have before the festival and then during. And most of the RVs that are on site have their own fire extinguishers as well. So I don't see a problem with having plenty of fire extinguishers on site. As far as alcohol use and drug use, we have DPSST certified security guards that are at the front entrance when everybody drives in, and they do check cars. I have seen firsthand some of the things, some people trying to bring beer in or alcohol, and we definitely confiscate it. And it does not get returned to them during the festival or after. So we do a good job there. And if I had to look forward to the event in '24, we will contract with Franklin Security or somebody to that nature that has plenty of certified security people.
Can you talk about what kind of training the volunteers get? Who, are kind of your extended security?
Mm-hmm. If we're talking about security, yes. So the DPSST certified security and the head of security who is hired, they come in the week of, maybe a few days before as well, and on site when the festival starts to train those people. And there's a whole handbook that we have. I think you have a copy of the emergency protocol, which addresses some of the security protocols as well. And we have over, depending on the crowd size at the time, over 20 radios that we all have to be able to communicate with each other. So they are trained, and the OLCC monitors, some of them are volunteer as well, and then of course the people staffing the bar are certified as well. So they do a really good job monitoring not only alcohol, but they roam the campgrounds as well. And any suspicious activities reported to the head of security and myself. And I would be the first one to call in a threat or a violation or a complaint if something was truly a problem on site, because I, like everybody else there, want to feel safe and secure and put on a family event for everybody involved. And so that's a huge factor for me. I have a daughter who has been enjoying the festival since she could walk. My parents join me there too. So it's definitely a family affair, and I can't speak to something having to do with cocaine. I would never suspect that, but I do remember that one incident. It's been several years. I believe it was 2017 or 18, and somebody slipped and fell into I don't know how, maybe there was intoxication involved, but what I do remember is that my head of security was on it within a minute or two, and we bought her a taxi home, and I believe she even left a purse behind, and my head of security took it to her house personally. So we definitely take care of our community there and the people.
And how many DPSST certified security people are there
it's
on site at any one time?
Right. So obviously we look at how many people are going to be on site, and it also includes all volunteers, vendors, security staff. That is included in the number. So we don't go above 3,000 for a mass gathering. In this case, we have it as 2,000. Everybody's included in that. So we have 1 per 100, I believe. And the ordinances themselves, sometimes we look at it and say, well, we need more. So I think like porta potties, for example, we always have more than what is stated in the codes. I believe we go over a few, especially with volunteers, but a few DPSST certified people. But I believe it's 1 per 100.
Are there any other comments you want to make, Stacy?
I wrote so much down, sorry. Oh, we also moved away from the adjacent properties, I believe. Well, 21 was different because we were a 500-person event, and we actually, in that event, still had extra provisions or conditions to approve that we treated it almost like a mass gathering. So other than the attendance and some of the fence lines and the venue, we treated it as a mass gathering with fire and safety and medical tent and everything else that we had. So we were prepared there, even though it wasn't a mass gathering. But we did move away 1,000 feet from the neighboring properties, especially the stage. I know there was comments that the stage was right there, and that was only in 2017 we had the stage in that location. So we are more than what the permit requires as far as feet away from any neighboring property. I think that's it for now, unless you have questions.
You know, the one other thing I wanted to ask about was neighbors' driveways. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to coordinate this, but I mean, is it possible to just kind of like put up a barrier at neighbors' driveways?
I don't think they wanted a complete barrier, obviously, for coming and going, but we do have signs now, and because we have a new gate, it's way more obvious since 2017 where to go, and I believe Uber was brand new in that area at the time. So I think that happened once or twice. I apologize if it was more than that, but it was 1 year, and it's very clearly marked now. And we have, when you pull off Knott Road, there's ample lanes and space to pull off. So anybody that's driving by or that's in an Uber, it will be very obvious. And we have actually a designated Uber and band lane, actually, 5 or 6 lanes deep. So that's definitely changed since 2017.
So did you have the 5 or 6 lanes last year, or in 21, even though it was smaller?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, it was, we took people right up the hill because it was so much smaller. And we didn't need that kind of space. We had that space if they wanted to pull in, and if somebody was confused or needed to be dropped off, there was ample space, but we didn't need all those lanes.
Okay, I guess one other thing to ask about was there were concerns expressed about habitat impacts for wildlife. I mean, are there things that you could do to kind of enhance the habitat in the times when the festival is not happening?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of would, you know, add some balancing out to any impacts during the period of the festival.
Possibly. I'm all ears for that, as far as if the Stevenson Ranch and the owners themselves wanted to do anything to promote that. I mean, my neighborhood in the West Hills has more deer than I can count sometimes on hands and feet running through the neighborhood, and I don't think that's here nor there. But as far as deer or other wildlife, the property owners have never, in my mind, and I've talked to them about this because they also have cows on the property, have not seen a change in that. And I don't think that 3 days when we leave no trace on the property, you know, yes, we have vehicles driving on it, but our patrons are really good about leaving no trace. And when they leave, we sweep the area we go like 20, 30 people deep and sweep it for any micro trash. We have the environmental center out there doing a no waste event. We don't have single-use plastic. I mean, we do a lot to help that out. And I'm a huge proponent of wildlife and of dogs and every other animal. And so it's hard for me to speak to that, how you would in the off-season help out the wildlife. But I
wonder, you know, maybe if this landowner hasn't had contact with the Soil and Water Conservation District. They offer all sorts of technical assistance and advice and sometimes actually incentives to private landowners to improve habitat, soil conservation, water efficiency, and things like that on their property. So I mean maybe you could contact them and just ask, like, is there even more we could be doing at this property?
Yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, when I go out there in the spring and off season and we look at what the land's doing and the grass and the moisture level and all that, it's, you know, it regrows really well. And with the irrigation out there now and the cows on the property and everything, it looks great in the spring. And then I also go out there 2 to 3 months after the festival and just kind of look around, and it's pretty restored, and I've taken pictures. So it's, like I said, it's a leave no trace sort of thing. And I don't think that 70 decibels of music affects much wildlife during the event, but yeah.
I'm not a bird expert. I can't.
Yeah. I think.
So do you have pictures from like 21 that you took?
Yes, there's photos. No real aerial. I mean, nothing that, looks down on it. But we have plenty of photos, yes. And I can send in a bunch. I was going to say one more thing and I forget now. Speaking of photos and videos, I don't know if it's important or worth speaking to the campground and people with propane stoves and in tents and RVs and kids cooking and all that. I personally don't like the fact that it was photographed and videoed other than what we have from our videographers and photographers. And I think in 2019, we commissioned somebody to take drone video just of the property, but we only kept it on the property, and that was just for our use and for marketing purposes.
Okay. So you're done?
I think so.
Thank you, Stacy.
So, yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, and Will is joining us again.
Good afternoon, almost afternoon, Commissioners. So you had requested some additional information from staff, including a history of violations, some additional understanding about how, in real time, how violations might be handled. In previous instances of these types of hearings, the board has proceeded immediately to deliberations. I think in this case, given that you've requested additional information, it would make sense for us to come back to you unless there's any objections to that procedure for a deliberative-like session where we would staff would bring additional information to you, come back with recommended conditions of approval, and look for the board to deliberate on this. I think this is, given that this event isn't for a year out, that there's no particular rush to complete this at this point, and that would be a good process, but definitely open to any suggestions you have.
Okay, does that, in doing that, can any of the other neighbors send in a letter?
I think. Oh.
Are we done with that?
You certainly have the discretion to leave the record open if you choose to, but I think that you just need to obviously.
Okay, we definitely, right, we definitely need to hear an update from your office. And I don't know, because it is a year out, it might not hurt to leave it open for a week, just so that if, any of the other neighbors that are, when you have animals, it's really frustrating. I know that, when there's a lot of crazy noise in my neighborhood, I know how it really gets my animals upset, and sometimes they're upset for way longer than they should be. So it's, I would just like to look at the record.
Yeah, we certainly can. So, of course, unlike land use, there's no specific guidelines in the statute on how to approach this. So it sounds like something like a 1 week, something that would be like an open record period where Rachel could receive any materials that were submitted in writing by members of the public. Like a land use proceeding, you'd probably like the applicant to have some opportunity to respond to that or suggest measures to help control concerns that were identified. So perhaps something like a 1 week period during which the board would receive written testimony. You close the oral hearing, the board would receive written testimony for 1 week, and then an additional week would be provided to the applicant to review and respond to those materials, at which time staff would consolidate them and bring it back to you for deliberations with that additional information.
That sounds excellent.
Okay, so just confirming the dates then, that first 7-day open record period for new written comments would be up April 12th, 1 week from today at 4 p.m. And then the applicant's rebuttal and final response would be up April 19th at 4 p.m. And then, as I'm understanding, we would schedule deliberations for this. Okay. Do you have any direction on how much time you'd like to review between the record closing and scheduling the deliberations?
Well, the good news is that this is an event that is a year out, but we really need to think about everything on both sides. You know, it's kind of like, I was listening, I was thinking, like, it's like the urban-rural divide, and that's where we're putting the event. It's out in our rural neighborhood, and they have issues that I believe we need to be very respectful of, and yet, you know, Stacy has a history of providing this for the community, and so I have, you know, I want to respect that too. So there's two sides to the issue, but I do think we're not in as big a hurry as the hearing that had been applied for a year ago. I know Stacy applied last fall for this year, and then she decided to postpone it for the event this year. So, you know, if we do it in May, I think that should work.
Yeah, I do think we heard that October was too tight for this year. So, I mean, we don't want to drag this out for too long, but I May just, you know, a few more weeks in April, maybe into May. That doesn't sound terrible to me. And this is this 1 week open, you know, keeping the written record open is an opportunity for people on all sides of the issue to weigh in.
Okay. So we'll do, just to confirm everything we're talking about, a 2-week open record period for 7 for all new written testimony, 2nd for the applicant only. And then specifically, you would like staff to look into history of violations that were reported, as well as who monitors those responses when they come in real time.
And it was pointed out that there might be a problem with how people do try and report something, and you know, we maybe need to tweak our system.
Yeah,
it sounds like, you know, we have an issue there.
Yeah, I definitely heard that. I certainly, to the extent that people are coming to our code enforcement forum, you know, that's not going to result in a timely response. So and there are provisions in the statute about the entry of government personnel, you know, the sheriff, the fire department, health personnel. We heard about the OLCC coming on property. So it's something just we can tighten that up and understand roles and responsibilities and make sure that those are communicated properly. And, you know, of course, you are, under the statute, you're obliged to issue this permit provided that it meets health and safety requirements. So staff, as we review the public comments that we hear from in the next week, and also the response of the applicant, will help you set up a deliberation where you can understand what some of these, you know, certainly fire issues, other things have health and safety components, and what reasonable conditions you might consider to try and ensure that those were correctly followed, and also in a way that's practically able to be implemented. You know, we want to make sure that there's some, if you put a condition in place, that there's some teeth to it, that it actually is followed.
Right. And we did, I mean, if there's a desire to do some more investigation of past complaints, that's one thing, but you know, I felt like in the rebuttal period we had a chance to hear about, you know, in significant detail about pre-event inspections by those various agencies, and you know, the presence of the sheriff and the OLCC during the event, and you know, the ratio of DPSST certified security people at the event as well. So you know, maybe we kind of capture and document some of that, but I think we heard a lot of what I was interested in asking about.
Great. So, are we good to go then, Rachel?
Yeah, I have done all my notes, and we'll have that open record period, and then
And
I'll schedule
your phone
delivery.
number and your email is on the screen.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
That's great. No, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thanks, Will. Okay, so now we're, should we just keep going then? Or what do you think, guys? Keep going? We're at number 11. Our SAMHSA. Great. Since you've been in the room for quite a while. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Kara Cronin, the Health Services Department Program Manager for Behavioral Health. And I'm here today requesting approval to apply for a a federal SAMHSA grant to provide or expand our treatment services for people experiencing homelessness. It's a $2.5 million grant distributed over 5 years. Our plan is to reduce barriers for people engaging in meaningful behavioral health treatment by creating or really expanding our mobile treatment services, including psychiatry and nursing, out into encampments or other locations where homeless community members are.
Kara, is this would this be a new fund source for us, or is this a program that we have accessed before?
We've applied and not been granted before, but this is new funding for us to expand already, growing homeless outreach services.
And if we weren't successful in the past, what are we doing differently now that's going to distinguish us?
Yeah, I think mobile psychiatry is pretty interesting. It's pretty innovative. Of course, larger cities are doing that, but so the mobile psychiatry and nursing, and really this is a mobile treatment team with a therapist, a case manager, there's peers, psychiatry and nursing, really providing intensive supports to people who qualify with serious mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders. So it is fairly innovative.
I have a question about the wording.
Yeah.
It says up to 5 years for political subdivisions of states. Now,
that's us.
Because we're Central Oregon, we're considered a political subdivision?
I think Deschutes County is I don't know all of the, Kim's nodding.
Okay, all right. I just thought it was.
Tell us which ORS makes us ORS 190 something.
Oh, gosh. Anyway, it just sounded really like I'm going to political subdivision. Oh, right. So, and are you getting a vehicle in this?
Yeah, obviously it's a mobile outreach team. We're stretched in our programming around vehicles, so we will be requesting a vehicle.
How does this team overlap with, complement, or coordinate with the homeless outreach team?
Yeah, it will be a complete complement, adding several positions. As our homeless outreach team currently is connecting people with behavioral health care, but it's in this more mainstream way of coming into clinic, getting an assessment. It's a process that's outlined by the ORS. So we're trying to reduce the barriers by bringing those assessment services and even psychiatry out into the community versus kind of making people come into our more mainstream ways that they access care.
Is it as simple as the homeless outreach team right now tries to connect people with clinicians, at a clinic, and this is taking clinicians and bringing them to the field?
Yeah, just the coordination of the timing and finding the person for the appointment time. There are a lot of moving parts that our team is doing, but this would really streamline the process and reduce barriers.
So when is the application due date then?
May 5th.
May 5th. Okay, and they will actually let you know then by the end of, you'll know by the end of September?
Yeah, I think that's when they plan to distribute funds. We'll probably know before then. I would hope we know before then.
Okay, and is the vehicle that $55,000 capital outlay?
Have we contacted any of our congressional delegation for letters of support for this application?
No, this grant wants letters of commitment, so they're not accepting letters of support, which is unusual. Really? And we aren't required to do a letter of commitment because we are the service provider. I think some entities that are going to be applying aren't behavioral health treatment providers. We're kind of an all-in-one, so we aren't actually required to submit a letter of commitment.
So what are we going to how are we going to support Cleveland Commons if we don't get this grant?
We're still going to support Cleveland Commons. We want to really do some carve out for them. We think that enterprise is going to need some behavioral health treatment support, but we already are committed to doing that. This would just make it more robust.
I mean, we're already committed to doing that, but we still have a lot of question marks around how we pay for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, our time there is, we've committed to office hours at Cleveland Commons, but it's sort of how much is a bit of an unknown, and it's depending on our staff time. We'll do some for sure in reach to that endeavor.
So how many hours have we committed to? Do you remember?
It's unclear. I mean, they haven't even, I don't think, contracted with a service provider, thinking, a few hours a week.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
No more questions, but I just to kind of circle back to the idea of a letter of support from a member of Congress. It for some granting agencies, it really makes a big difference, and I would be happy to contact the staffs from our two senators' offices and then play dumb later on and just say oh, I didn't know that you couldn't submit letters of support, if that sounded okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Commissioner Chang.
So do we have a motion?
I move approval to apply for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration grant for treatment for individuals experiencing homelessness.
Okay, and I'll second it. Any further discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes?
And I vote yes. So thank you so much.
Cross fingers.
Yes, good luck. Would be nice, right? Okay, item number 12. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Holly.
I'm Adam Goggins, Program Manager with the Crisis Team.
Hi, Holly Harris, Behavioral Health Director.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. I was going to request approval to apply for an OHA Mobile Health Unit grant. Earlier in, in 2022, House Bill 4052 was passed, which allocated approximately $1.275 million to expand mobile health services for both physical health and behavioral health services just across the state to targeted populations or disadvantaged populations overall, or priority populations is what they define it as. And they had just now made those funds available. They're set to expire kind of at the end of this biennium, so OHA is pretty eager to try and see those funds kind of out the door. One thing that we were hopeful to use this on is on acquisition and retrofitting a Ford T-150 transit van, which we would use for expanding our non-law enforcement crisis response capacity. Currently, Deschutes County Sheriff's Office has been very gracious and has actually purchased us a transit van previously, which would be the same make and model of, and has been retrofitting it kind of to our needs. And this would essentially mirror that very similarly, but would have potentially some added assets, such as like a potential elevator for wheelchair accessibility and those kinds of things is kind of what our hope is. And so, yeah. Are there any questions or concerns?
So does this mean this $100,000 is going to reimburse the sheriff's office, or we're going to get another one?
This would be a second one, and so the hope would be that this would add extra capacity. So should we have two crises occurring simultaneously, or anywhere in the county, or should we require is essentially to respond to anyone who has some kind of physical disability or something along those lines that might need transportation. We could potentially use this secondary van and respond to the scene with that.
And we also have two separate teams of 3 that are running 24/7. So this kind of allows each team to have their van outfitted specifically for the needs, and then also backfill if the van's out of commission for a minute to have options.
Seasonal tire changes happen twice a year, I guess, and so that can put them out of commission for potentially a week at a time and those kinds of things.
This is a very nuts and bolt question, but we just heard about a vehicle, a kind of fancy, complicated vehicle for that last proposal, and we're talking about this one. Who manages the fleet for, this is just something I actually don't, I'm not a,
Well, Randy does it for the county.
Yeah, we obviously use the road department. Randy's our go-to for helping that. We have internal people within health services, Chris Weiler, Darren Darlington, and then individual administrative support specialists within each team that manage each team's fleet, and it kind of goes up from there, and then ultimately to the road department. But we don't ask Randy to manage the day-to-day of our different fleet operations, but he ultimately does take care of our needs for us.
Right. And I mean, are there people over at Roads who actually do all the maintenance on the, kind of work on the vehicle, physically work on the vehicles, or do we outsource that to?
So we've, as far as regular routine maintenance, that would be more like the roads department. The retrofitting and some of the things that are going into it, we've actually been in contact with and have been talking with the sheriff's office, and their motor pool supervisor, Pete Martin, has essentially been our contact person on there, and so they're a lot more familiar with retrofitting or taking cars, your standard Charger or whatever, and turning it into something else, turning it into a squad car. And so they're the ones who have been working on our current van and are the ones who would make any kind of modifications to it from there.
Okay. And then if we have a major breakdown, right, not just changing my oil filter or rotating the tires or whatever, what happens then?
Well, I think it would probably depend on what it was. If it was something our road department was capable of taking care of and managing, great. If not, we'd probably contract out and have to pay for those expenses, and that would come out of our department budget, right, to make sure those needs get met.
Okay.
Which is why having kind of the second van gives us options because I'm sure there's going to be stuff that happens.
Yeah.
We're gonna.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this funding is actually sitting out there, and we need to get it as fast as we can in order to buy this, because it has to be spent by the end of June.
Right. I believe it has to be they have to get it to us by then, and we have to allocate it. And so,
yeah,
knowing vans are not here quickly.
Right. Yeah. I would not think so.
To put it mildly, that we would go ahead and get the purchase going, and then obviously.
Okay.
They would transfer you the funds as long as you could obligate it.
I'm sorry.
They would transfer us the funds as long as we could.
Correct.
Demonstrate that we're obligating them. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. That's from the 1.725 million that's sitting out there, you said?
That's correct. And we don't have a sense really of how many applications they're planning to grant, what amounts they're planning to grant. So somebody could submit an application that's for developing a whole Melville Health unit with staff, and it could take up the whole $1 million. So we really don't have any knowledge of what that's going to look like. But we thought, why not throw our hat in the ring if you all are supportive, and see if we can get the van we need out of this.
Well,
Great.
asking for 100,000 seems like a very modest, non-greedy ask.
Right. That's what we thought.
For a state pool.
So can I have a motion?
I move approval to apply for the Oregon Health Authority's Mobile Health Unit Pilot Program grant.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, now we're to item number 13. Can we just take a 5-minute break or 3-minute break or something? Would that be okay? 3? Thanks. Let's reconvene. We're ready to go. And we're on item number 13.
Okay, I'm just going to do introductions and then turn it over to Sherry Pinner. But good afternoon, Vice Chair Adair and Commissioner Chang, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. Sherry Pinner is CDD's Management Analyst, and we want to provide an overview of how we're approaching fees for the department heading into next fiscal year. So Sherry's prepared a short PowerPoint. It's in the packet for anybody who's listening online or has access to the meeting materials, but it's of course presented online. So unless you have questions for us immediately, I think it'll be helpful to go through the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sherry.
You're welcome. So good afternoon, and as Peter mentioned, we met with the Internal Budget Committee on March 23rd, and through that conversation, it was recommended that we meet with you in a public board meeting to just kind of let you know what we're seeing for our fiscal year 24 budget projections, and then to seek any kind of guidance that you might be able to give us on what our fee increases are going to be. And so what you're seeing here is our a graph of July through March 20th permitting volumes, and as we've noted each month this year, we've experienced a decline from permitting volumes in fiscal year 22. Those declines have a sort of reset at a certain percentage, and they really haven't varied much over the past 6 months, so we do somewhat feel like this is a new normal. And so our current permitting volumes, January through March, have really indicated similar volumes to what we saw, say, fiscal year 15, 16, and 17. So we've, the increase we saw during the pandemic seems to be sort of an anomaly.
And Sherry, when you say that this seems like a new normal, I mean, so we do not expect further declines then, or?
I certainly hope not. I don't know that to be the case, but really what we're hearing from our community partners, which include the Central Oregon Builders Association, developers. We've got, some of our staff have relationships with engineers. We're really not hearing of any industry that's expecting a significant increase in the next 12 or so months. Certainly, having said that, we don't know. But we certainly saw a little bit of a volume increase during the month of March, but overall, those declines that we experienced have been remaining stable. So the declines have not increased or decreased. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So our revenues summary, we're again expecting similar volumes to what we are experienced this year. The budget projections will include a 10.9% increase from the International Code Council building valuation. So that is a valuation increase that occurs at the state of Oregon in our Excel software, kind of behind the scenes, if you will. Strategies to balance will include a combination of requested fees, reserve fund transfers, or reduction of fund balance. The budget as it is submitted, which those were due last week, does include an amount of general fund for hearings officer services. Our expenditure summary, really, we're submitting sort of a bare bones budget. We're not doing much of anything extra. So that includes our personnel, which you are all aware that we reduced our FTE by 8 in January of 2023, and that was really in an effort to align current staffing with current permitting volumes. Certainly the budget includes increases for COLAs, step increases, PERS, health benefits, trust increases, some general inflationary increases for materials and services, and then, of course, the new process for budgeting for hearings officer expenses.
And if I could just add to that last point, when you look at 2015 and 2017, it is true that our staffing was lower than what we have now. Back in 2015 and 2017, we had staff that had largely spent their whole career with the department. Decades. And so we had incredible efficiencies and institutional knowledge. You fast forward to 2023, I think it's a majority of our staff's been with our department less than 5 years. And so training is a huge part of our responsibility across the divisions, just given that inexperience. And in 2015, 2017, so many of our staff were topped out. So if there was one year there could be a COLA, of course, but now because of this turnover, so many of our staff not only are eligible for a COLA, but if they're meeting their performance measures, they're going to get a step increase, as Sherry noted. So there's been quite a transformation as CDD has dealt with just attrition over time.
And then Sherry said we had 4 people that left this last month from CDD.
Correct. We're seeing in the permit techs, which are our colleagues who are on the front lines of intake and doing preliminary reviews for assortment of development-related applications. We're seeing permit techs resign on about a 6 to 8 month average, and so we're constantly training. And we've just recently filled what were 2 of those vacancies, but we're never able to catch up. And then with building inspectors, we had 2 building inspectors, not including our assistant BO, but 2 building inspectors that just had about 2 years of experience. So when you think about all the training that goes into understanding and applying the building code for structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, primarily if they were residential inspectors, coupled just understanding how that's applied in the field. About 2 years is when we get real kind of cost recovery. And so I hope that's not a pattern, because we've talked about in the past just how difficult it is through the state to get inspectors their requisite certificates as it pertains to residential certificates and even commercial level. So anyway, those are just kind of the realities that we're dealing with that I think put into context that bullet point that you just highlighted, Sherry.
Okay. So really, in summary, our expenditures are about 1.2 to 1.3 million more than our budgeted revenues. And again, Peter spoke to the 64 FTE, and certainly you can imagine as we receive each and every resignation, we do a little bit of an analysis on, do we rehire? What are our projections indicating? Certainly we have to consider not only staffing to get the permits out, but we also succession planning. It takes a significant amount of time to get people trained up, and so all of those are considerations. In preparing the fiscal year 24 budget, I worked up probably 6 different scenarios, just playing with different options. And what we presented to the preliminary budget meeting attendees was 3 different options. And so I wanted to go through those with you, see what your questions are and what guidance you might give us. So our option number 1 would generate about $806,000. Those application fees would range from 4% to 20%, and building valuation, so this is code compliance, public information counter, and advanced planning, would increase anywhere from 0.02% to 0.05%. In this scenario, CDD definitely will need to dip into their reserve funds. The ending fund balance in this scenario remains whole, and the contingency would be about 13.8%. You can see that the utilizing the reserve funds to that $560,000 would leave Fund 300, so that's general community development, with about a 4.5 month reserve. Building safety would be about 20.6 months, and electrical would be about 8.9. Option number 2, fee increases would generate about $682,000, so those application fees would range from 4% to 18%. Building valuation increases would be 0.02% to 0.04%. Under this scenario, we would utilize both a reserve transfer and also spending down our ending fund balance. That would result in a contingency of about 11.6%. The reserve funds would then be for the general CDD about 4.7 months, Building safety remains at 20.6, and electrical would be about 8.7. And option number 3, fee increases would generate about $575,000. Those fees would range from 4% to 16%. Building valuation would be 0.02% to 0.03%. This option would also utilize a reserve fund transfer as well as a spend down of fund balance. Contingency would be about 11.3%. The reserve balances would end up being for the general CDD about 4.6 months, building safety 20.6 months, and electrical about 8.5 months.
And just, I'm sure this may be a question, but as soon as this memorandum was finalized, which was last week, Sherry forwarded this information to the Central Oregon Central Oregon Builders Association and the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. I did speak to COBA representative yesterday. She was aware of this conversation, and my understanding is a letter's forthcoming, or possibly you've already received it. I will acknowledge anecdotally that my sense was that COBA's obviously always aware of fees, but to the extent that their heightened concerns at this point, if you saw the article, I want to say it was last week, about how the city of Bend is approaching their challenges from a revenue standpoint, which the article acknowledged a need to raise fees by 60% in the bulletin, and how the staff's trying to phase that in over basically 3 to 4 years. My sense was COBA's hypersensitive about the implications of those fees over a 4-year period, 3 to 4 year period, as opposed to what we're discussing today. But that's not to say that they're not aware, and of course have concerns about fees in general. But nonetheless, that's, I think, where their attention is focused at the moment.
And our fees are always higher than Crook and Jefferson County. I mean, I hear that from people all the time. So, and then does that make affordable housing? No. If we've got more into your fees, so.
Yeah, we recognize that there's no easy answers here. You can dial the fees down, and it means it comes at the expense of lower ending year fund balances and lower reserves. The reserve that's really volatile is Fund 300. As noted, we only have a few months, 4 months, approximately a little over 4 months. Of course, we are and that we're not at all suggesting that the revenue will stop on July 1st, but if revenue is volatile, we're going to need to really monitor what that means to especially to Fund 300. And as Sherry noted, our personnel costs are our highest expense, and so regardless, we will be tracking. Sherry tracks our revenue, and we are mindful of the vacancies that we have as of today. We have a retirement that's expected in June. So how we approach those vacancies, of course, we will be very cognizant as to whether or not we fill those, given, if the revenue projections or what we're seeing month to month continue to show volatility. As we're looking for direction today, to the extent that's possible, the board is well aware of the training that it takes to when we bring on new staff, the retention and recruitment challenges that we have. So to the extent that we see volatility with our revenues and it leads to personnel decisions, it's just important to acknowledge that when the economy does pick up, we are already having challenges attracting employees that come with significant experience, and the training that goes into successful recruitments. And I mentioned this to COBA yesterday. It will take us longer to process permits, and as long as our COBA and CORE are are primary customers of ours, as long as they're aware of those implications, and certainly the board, then we live with those consequences. But it's important to note our current challenges and the challenges that could be elevated in the event, regardless of what option you can provide direction on, what that means for our department just over time. We're just, as I mentioned, in 2015, 2017, we had seasonal staff, seasoned staff. We don't have that today, and we are constantly dealing with attrition. And I think that is a new normal for CDD. So it comes with constant training, which is why I think we have, a little higher FTE than we might otherwise have if we were looking back a few years ago.
It's great you have that historical knowledge, though, and, experience does really, make a difference on how efficient people can be with processing. I remember hearing, like in 17, maybe 18, where people could just come to the counter and they'd have something, and somebody at the, would know exactly what it was, and they'd stamp it, and then that's lost. So then it takes a month to get that same stamp.
Yeah, that's a real risk and a real concern. So there are a lot of moving parts to each one of these options, and it's hard for me to kind of tease apart what the trade-offs are that we're looking at with these different options. I mean, can you, from your perspective, share kind of, option one is, provides the benefit of X, but, it costs the most, or can you provide us with some of that perspective on trade-offs from where you sit?
Absolutely, thank you. So I think overall, all options include the 64 FTE, right? Mm-hmm. All of them have the same revenue budget, they have the same base revenue budget projections. The variances between the three would be the amount of the fee increase. And then the big trade-off would be how quickly do we spend down our reserves or our fund balance. So in all of these scenarios, I calculated our current year ending fund balance to be possibly 1.4 or 1.5 million. That means that this fiscal year alone, CDD would have spent down their fund balance by 600 some odd thousand. So we're currently spending down our fund balance. And at some point, we won't, there won't be wiggle room for that. We are required to have an 8.3% contingency. CDD has long had a higher contingency than that based on the fact that we are very well aware that it takes us longer than 4 to 8 weeks to turn a permit. So we've typically come in somewhere between 8.3 and say 16. My biggest concern is, again, if the ending fund balance right now, the way it was calculated, is that we will still see some sort of an increase in permitting volumes through April, May, and June. That may not happen. It didn't happen in March. I'm still hopeful that that will occur, but my biggest concern is that estimated fund balance is too high. And of course, we won't know until June presents itself on what that looks like. So again, each of these scenarios, option number one would be kind of fee increases, or the highest fee increase, if you will, so that we're generating revenues from our fees and we're not having to dip into our reserves or our fund balance as much as some of the other scenarios. And when I sat down to start looking at the different options that we had, the first thing I wanted to do was sort of determine what our personnel expense increase was. And it was a little bit difficult in the sense that CDD had just removed 8 FTE. There weren't budget adjustments for that. So to simply look at our budget reports, look at personnel this current year to personnel next fiscal year, it's not a good indicator. But we did have one division that had the same staff this year as they're going to have next year, and all of those staff are eligible for a step increase. So that would be the step increase, the COLA, the increase on health benefits, PERS, and that ended up being around 14.5%. For that particular division, and that division also is one that is seeing an extraordinary decrease in permitting volumes, so that would be on-site, and for that division, option number one would be a 20% increase. And again, in option number one, there are fee increases, and there's still a spend down in reserves. So in none of the scenarios that I've presented are our reserves safe, if you will. All of these scenarios plan on a reserve fund transfer, and of course, those transfers won't occur until actual periods have occurred and we see that we need the money. You know, if we, for example, if we got to, August and permitting volumes really picked up, there might be a scenario in which reserve transfers won't be needed. So that's really managed in a real-time need. I don't see, in my mind, none of these scenarios included reduced services. All of these scenarios are to keep our services at the level that they are now.
I have a question. You're talking about 64, and we just lost 4. So are you still thinking to replace those 4, or are those out of the number?
That's a great question. Those are included in the 64 base that we're going to start with. However, based on this discussion and how the budget process works, we will take any direction that you give us, build that into our analysis, and determine what that means.
And I would just add that it's going to be prudent for us to be very careful about how we approach these vacancies. And for one division in particular, we are currently recruiting for a code compliance specialist. That was one of our resignations. We have 4 code compliance specialists, one of whom is a lead. They each have, 75, 90 cases on average with one person, and we had 5 full, employees before this most recent resignation that happened this year. I think it's going to be prudent unless the board has, there's just consequences here. There is a scenario where we would pause. We've gone through a successful recruitment process. There's been a first round of interviews. There are some noteworthy candidates. Those candidates can still be considered as active candidates for 6 months. It may be appropriate to wait and see if we want to fill that, while still recognize that we have to institute a system that ensures the 4 code compliance specialists we have are not burning out. And we've been doing that since I've been in my position, is figuring out how to triage, how to prioritize, because there's always going to be an in basket. But those are just, some of the not challenges, but just some of the deliberative approaches that we have to be contemplating about, knowing that, just as Sherry noted, if we assume this fiscal year's revenues are going to apply next year, which is optimistic, very optimistic, we're still going to have to tap into our end-of-year fund balance, our reserves, and with whatever fees the board ultimately supports to keep ourselves whole. And lastly, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I don't want to, this reserve, we want to maintain it. We don't want to exhaust it, right? So it's going to be critical that we are tracking which we do always, but now more than ever, tracking our kind of month-to-month fluctuations. This kind of natural attrition that's just happened in some respects is very fortuitous, because we can do more with less, and as opposed to the alternative, if things get really volatile. Obviously, we'd have to make some swift decisions that we might not otherwise have to make so soon if our budget is fluctuating.
Well, yesterday I heard that a major project in Prineville that was 30% done, they stopped it. It was stopped. And I'm like, whoa. Some group had a huge investment at 30%. And they still made that decision. I think this morning I saw that the 30-year mortgage had dropped just down a touch below 7%. At least it had gone down. So, that mortgage rates are really so frightening to people.
The reason why we went with option 1, Sherry's extraordinary as a senior management analyst. I would offer supplemental remarks that the differences between options 1 and 3, if you look at the impacts to a single-family home at 1,700 square feet, the fees are really nominal. and no one wants to see fee increases, and CDD departments are not nimble to address inflationary pressures, instantaneously. It takes us a year to kind of work through the system and prepare for the budget accordingly. So that's kind of
So
why
you're saying then that they would have a 4%? They're at the bottom end of this range increase?
So more specifically, in this particular scenario, our code compliance fee would increase by 0.02%. Public information counter fee would increase by 0.05%, and advanced planning would also be a 0.05%. Then we go into our building safety division, which we are not asking for any sort of a fee increase on the building permit type work they do, but we are asking for an increase on their supplemental permits, so that would be plumbing, mechanical, of 4%. Those particular fees have not received a fee increase since fiscal year 19, and I think it's just it would behoove us to go ahead and ask for a fee increase to try to keep up with inflation. Our electrical division and our current planning applications would increase by 15%. In our on-site division, we're asking for a 20% fee increase.
So are you saying the increase for that single-family home is the increase is $750, or the total fee is $750?
Increase.
That increase.
Increase, which does not include supplementals, does not include electrical.
What option one does is, we have a deficit of five. What was it, Sherry? We have to make up a deficit of approximately $560,000, and that with the natural attrition that we're having, it makes me think cautiously that if we don't fill those positions, assuming that the revenue is consistent with 2023, we can absorb that difference by not filling those positions. So we still remain lean and strong, and because we can kind of focus it on the FTEs. The other two options, of course, have, as Sherry has summarized, it leaves I just feel like it leaves our reserves funds far more vulnerable if we see real changes in the economy. I feel like we're more nimble with option one, at least going into the first quarter of next fiscal year. But I recognize that no one wants to see fees increase at the rates that we are acknowledging. But if you compare the fees comparison to option one to option three and what it does to a 1,700 square foot home in terms of increased fees, the difference between the three is not a lot. When you especially if you factor in a 30-year mortgage, those fees are going to be applied to the home if someone buys for a 30-year fixed mortgage or a 30-year mortgage. So I probably seems like I'm making justifications for this. I guess I am, knowing that nonetheless these fees do come at a cost. There's no getting around it. But I think option one gives us a little bit more flexibility than 2 and 3, which makes our contingency or year-end fund balance lower. We don't have as much to work with under 2 and 3 if the economy becomes more volatile. We get a little more time with option one because we have a little bit more in the reserve, a little bit more in the contingency or in the year-end fund balance, and so that coupled with, I dare say, natural attrition that's happening positions us more favorably heading into or as we navigate through the fiscal year than the other two.
And
so how much, what is the total cost, though, for building a 1,700 square foot single-family home? I mean, permit-wise, Sherry, if the increase is $750,
under option one,
yeah,
the base building permit would be $4,745. That is about a $750 increase over current year.
Okay, so the total number would be $750? 4,745?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then, and again, that does not include
Include electrical.
supplemental or electrical. And I can give you some examples on what those particular fee increases would look like under this option number 1 proposal. So a plumbing permit for a single-family dwelling with 2 baths, that would be an $18 increase. A mechanical fee, we have something that's charged called a minimum fee, that increases 3%. So those are pretty minimal. Under the electrical permits, at a $15 or 15% fee increase, 1,000 square foot or less would be a $40 increase on the permit. In our on-site division, so this is the division that I'm requesting a 20% fee increase. A site evaluation would increase by about $150. And an example of a current planning application fee increase at 15% for an administrative determination with notice, that's about a $260 increase.
Okay. I want to know, how many other employees are we missing at this moment? How many FTE are, besides the 4 that we just lost?
How many are vacant?
Yeah, vacancies right now?
I think we would be at 7 or 8, counting one we received yesterday.
Okay, so the 4, or there's 5 now that just happened?
So currently vacant, we have, I want to say 3 or 4 permit technicians. We have a code compliance specialist. We have an assistant building official. We have
Administrative support.
administrative support. We also have a building safety plan reviewer that's been vacant since August of 2021.
And that's a commercial plans examiner. So our current assistant building official is spending more of her time doing commercial level review, like Tavern 44, Commissioner.
Yes.
So
the food is great.
So, yeah, I think that covers it.
So you're like, you said 7 total?
7 or 8, I would.
7 or 8, okay.
We did just hire 2 new permit technicians. They both started either at the very end of March or the beginning of April. So we welcome them.
And about, I want to say 4 weeks ago, we brought on 2 entry-level building inspectors who are learning the trade every day and getting they were thankfully through Randy Scheid connection with the state was able to lean graciously to get their ability to get some of their certs that they don't have over the next 6 months. So, but they are inexperienced and but have the personality and the drive and the demeanor to fit our culture, but they are literally on the ground floor learning this new craft.
Wow.
And I recognize this is a lot of information. Commissioner DeBone our chair is not here. We were hoping to get direction, but if it makes sense, and Eric, I'm looking at you, if it makes sense to come back next week. I know that we need instruction pretty quickly, but if we don't want to.
I think we should come back next week because Nick will be in the room too. And it's always good with Nick's experience he might have some insight into, let's hope he got on the plane on time and he catches his.
He's still working on it.
Oh, I know. I told him to go to the museum. I gave him a museum recommendation in Philadelphia this morning. But I think it would be, if that's okay, just to look at this, I feel like I see the comments out there. People go, oh my gosh, to do something in Deschutes County, it always costs so much more. And, we want people we want them to still build their houses if that's their dream. And they are going to be paying property taxes when their house is done. So, I know that's, out there, and we have to get your department on a safe financial footing.
So what I did, since budgets were, the deadline was last Friday, what I've done is submitted a budget under option number 1. Budget staff here at the county certainly are aware that this conversation is occurring and that there may be some revisions. So I just wanted to offer up that piece of information.
And just for clarification, that's the department request that then goes to the county administrator, the budget officer, and there's can be changed between the department request and when the budget officer puts together their budget.
So if that's acceptable, if we shift it to next week, I know that packets were due for next week an hour ago. I don't know if it makes sense, if I looked at Brenda, if we just have this under, I mean, we could have it under other items. We're not going to submit any new.
We have enough time to.
I mean, we could resubmit this memorandum with a new date, if that's okay. We'll just upload that, and we can acknowledge that this is a continuation of the conversation, and then the public would have it. Okay, thank you, Brenda, for allowing that, and
Thank you, Brenda.
we appreciate the ability to have this conversation, and we acknowledge that there's no simple turn of the dial as an imperfect metaphor for how to address our current circumstance as we look into next fiscal year.
I mean, I would just say that like the difference in terms of fee impacts between option 3 and option 1 aren't that big, and so from my perspective, option 1 seems like what we need to do. I mean, if this is our, if we're kind of at a new normal level, this is not an implosion, and we need to preserve that reserve for an implosion. This is not we need to be prepared for a 2008, 2009 type event. So it seems like this is, option 1 is the best way to do that, to preserve our reserve in case of a real crisis. And given that we have all of these new green staff, and we need to invest in all of them so that eventually some will sort out and hopefully become our seasoned, kind of lean staff in the future. I don't see what else we can do besides, to support option number 1.
We will also, as timing will have it, if there's agreement to continue the conversation to next Wednesday. Tuesday is our monthly meeting with COBA. So by the time when we met with the preliminary budget group, that was after our March COBA meeting. So we can further highlight that this conversation is ongoing, and I do anticipate either indirectly or directly, you'll get a correspondence from them. Of course, we recognize them as one of our primary customers, and like I said, we continue to be as transparent as possible with everybody, including COBA.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate your time.
Challenging times. Okay, other items? Do we have anything?
I've got one item, but I want to make sure the commissioners get to their other items first.
On Monday, I mentioned that I was in Salem providing input to various legislators on the drought package. Yesterday, I attended the Oregon the Oregon Governor's Conference on Tourism, and provided a little presentation on a panel about our campground feasibility study. And there was maybe 40 people in the audience, and they were very interested in the work that we're doing in Deschutes County.
Okay, great. And I spent almost 6 hours to testify for the L Committee, and apparently the Water Committee is now in rules, I believe, House Bill 3124, that drought package. So, and then this Friday we have AOC meetings set up to start at 8 a.m. So are we still doing legislation at 8 a.m. also?
No, we're not. Last week the board
Right.
wanted to cancel the meeting for this Friday.
Okay.
Legislative update.
Okay, good. All right.
We could have tacked it on today, but there's only 2 of us here, so.
Gotcha. Sounds like a good plan. And then I think next Monday morning, I have a meeting with Director Bell for the MAC committee funding, and did send an email to Helping Hands to see if they could come over and give us a presentation per my conversation with Cheyenne and Megan. So hopefully we're going to hear back from them when they can come. So, Eric.
Thank you, Commissioners. We have a request to apply for an Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. Jen and Lee will discuss it more.
Afternoon, Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager.
Lee Randall, Facilities Director.
Great. Who's going to take it away?
I guess I'm beginning.
I can do it if you want.
We didn't coordinate as well as we should have. There's a federal grant available, the Energy Efficiency Block Grant, and about $78,000. And today we would just like to seek approval to do what essentially is a pre-application to show that we're qualified as an entity to receive those funds. And then our intention would be to come back to the board with some proposed projects. We do have at least one project that's currently underway that's phased that those dollars we believe would apply to if the board chose to use them in that way. And I'll let Jen expand upon that.
Yeah, I think he wrapped it up, but basically this pool of money is sitting there. It's designated for Deschutes County. It's non-competitive. So we would just need to submit the pre-application information sheet to show that we're interested in going after that money. And then we have up until the January 2024 to apply for a specific project for those funds.
Great.
So we're just here to seek board approval or direction on whether or not we should seek those funds.
I guess one question I have is, like our facilities, our buildings are clearly one way that we can address the goals of this program. There are other county functions that I'm thinking may or may not also address, connect with the goals of this program, and two things I'm thinking of off the top of my head are, fleet stuff, fleet electrification, or, conversion to alternative fuels. And, we have this massive landfill methane gas project kind of in the works out at Knott. And so I'm wondering, and those are just two things that kind of come to the top of my head. So I'm wondering how we can both, I'm wondering if we're able to both, because $78,000 is that's not the money that we use to implement something. That's the money we use for like planning and analysis and stuff like that. So I'm wondering how we ask for these $78,000 in a way that it allows us to think broadly about energy at the county, energy and conservation at the county, rather than just kind of putting it all into our facilities. Not that that's not a really important place to put some of those funds, but
I think for this initial application, we won't need to demonstrate exactly how we would use them. We would have between now and January to come back to the board with some options for how they might be used. And so we could look at some of the options that you suggested, as well as areas where there might be an investment where, as opposed to a planning application, there's a direct payback for an efficiency measure. So we think there's some efficiency measures that where the money can be invested directly. And then, as well, to your point, it could be used to plan for a larger scale investment as well, where we would need to bring dollars from another program to actually implement the project.
Great.
And we reviewed the pre-award information sheet, and nowhere in there do they ask for any sort of guide or like next steps on what projects we're going for. So we, as Lee said, we can reach out to some of these other departments too and start generating some ideas. And when we come back, if we go forward with seeking these funds, we can come back with a range of options for you.
And it's, the maximum we can put for is 78.
$78,310 is the
Okay.
exact amount. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is planning money, right? It's not implementation dollars.
Yeah,
by a few light bulbs.
it would depend on the scale of the project. We have some opportunities with some HVAC replacements where we could gain a 20% efficiency gain by replacing old equipment. So that would be an example of where the money could be applied directly to equipment upgrades that would result in energy savings. But to your point, that's one area. We could also use it to plan for a larger scale project.
Right. And, I mean, and even just like identifying projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, once you have something identified, then there are ways to pay for it, right? It's and sometimes the biggest hurdle is even knowing where the right places to focus are. I mean, like, I have, for example, from buildings, you have a good sense of what kind of opportunities we have in lighting, right? But, for example, I have no idea how many street lights the roads manages, and street lights are often a huge opportunity within municipal operations. And there's also this gets into more solid waste stuff, but we're kind of negotiating a land transfer with the Bureau of Land Management, and if we were to secure that land, there's a big swath of it, and its western edge, basically between the railroad, and Highway 97, that you can't really do landfill operations, and might make a great place to do like a solar, a ground-mounted solar installation or something like that. So I mean, there's a lot of things we could do.
Exactly.
Oh, yes. But speaking of the solar, next to 97, when are they going to water those poor little plants, those trees that have never grown? Never, right? They're just sitting there vegetating. It's really unfortunate. So do we need a motion then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I move approval of submitting an application for the Federal Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program.
I'll second it with, it says $78,310.
Right.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
I vote yes, so thank you. Thank you for coming in. Are you okay? Get some water.
I know, joking a little bit.
Lee, do you have a new staff person to introduce?
Pardon?
Do you have a new staff person to introduce?
Sure. Brent Harding is our new project coordinator, and he's here because this is a project he'd likely be involved in.
Great.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
We met out in the hallway at some point, but
Yep.
good to see you again, Brett.
Brett, so you're the project coordinator is this what Dave used to do? What's it, Dave?
No, a different position.
Okay, all right, great. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. All right, are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, Stephanie.